Hello, 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 folks. Happy Sunday. It is Sunday, right? Yeah, it is. Hey, Rascal. How's everybody doing today? I hope everybody is having a good day. I am very cold. I don't know about you, but this time of year is always a shock to the system. Hey, Frazee. Hey, Arenzi. It's a Sunday, indeed. Anybody do anything fun this weekend? Canadian friends, today is your Thanksgiving, right? Hey, Unicorn. Hey, Arwen. Well, I hope all the Canadians, if there's any Canadians watching, I hope you are having a good Thanksgiving so far. Arenzi says, was watching your Travesty React VOD for the third time. Wow. Uh, because I'm still lost. Oh my goodness. Well, Renzi, if it makes you feel any better. So Leon did say that, React is not necessarily something that you 100% have to be an expert in order to go on the job hunt, right? It's not like, React is not like HTML or something like that, where it's like it's a fundamental that you have to know. It's an extra thing, right? It's extra, which is why it's at the end. So I wouldn't stress too much about it. Hey, Rohit. Hey, Janias. Hey, Leibniz. Ah, Leibniz asks, what's Banki? Well, we will get into that in just a second. What is Banki indeed? Hey, Janvo, howdy from Canada. How's your Thanksgiving going? Welcome, welcome, everybody. Hey, Marcia, welcome. Part of the catch up crew. So I just finished your JS homework and the Wordle calculator exercises. Oh, that's been a little bit. Yeah, I remember. Just nice to be able to answer a few basic cues about it. Oh, about React. Okay, Rascal says it's nice to just be able to answer a few basic questions about it. If the interview goes in that direction, then you can, as Leon says, take a weekend. Yep, take a weekend and start going deep on the stack. And if it included React, then that too. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. That's what Leon keeps saying, right? It's not, we don't got to be, experts in this advanced stuff. It's more about if your interview calls for a certain tool or something that you aren't very good at or haven't been introduced to, then you just cram the weekend before and you get a basic knowledge and you just go from there. Chanpo, I'm glad your day is going well. Let me get my tea ready. Oh man, let me tell you, I've uh, I've got some of that too. Hurt says, "Hey guys, hope everybody's having a good Sunday. Thank you. Yeah." Rohit says, "How would you rate 100 devs?" I've learned mostly through YouTube, but certainly looking for a step-by-step guide. Oh yeah, 100 devs is great for that because it literally takes you from zero to web developer, right? And it's all free, so you can always Rohit, you can always give it a try, and there's no fee or obligation, or you don't. There's nothing official. You can start or stop or skip ahead or do whatever you think is appropriate. And that's the cool thing about it, right? There's no obligation or schedule, or you just do it on your own time and pick and choose what you want. Maybe there's stuff you are. It sounds like you've already started learning, so maybe you could skip the first few lessons. But I would say give it a try and see how it feels for you. There's also a great Discord, which is super active. So if you're one of those people that you like to collaborate with people or ask questions, you can join the Discord. Exclamation point Leon if you want a link to the Discord. Oh, Feyre, thank you so much for the sub. Wow. Thank you. I didn't notice that. I think my yeah, you subscribed 3 days ago, Feyre. Thank you. I'm glad my Twitch is rewinding through all my new followers since my last stream, because otherwise I wouldn't have seen that. So, Feyre, if you're out there, thank you for the sub. All right, looks like we've got a ban here. One second. Oh, I forgot to turn on closed captions. Give me 1 second to do that too. There we go. And let me get closed captions going. Okay. All set. There we go. So captions should be available if you want or need them now. If you want to turn them on, I know we've got a few new people here today. So if you want to turn them on, you should be able to hover over the right side of the stream window, I think, and that should bring up a closed caption icon for you. Okay, so I think we're going to have a pretty chill stream today. Ban them like they submitted false Huntover submissions. But yeah, we're gonna have a chill stream today. I know it's Thanksgiving for some folks, and it is. Is there a football thing for the Americans out there? Is there a American football thing going on today? I saw there was a bunch of stuff on Twitter. I honestly don't know. This is not facetious. I honestly don't know. So, is there like a big game today? I figured if it's Canadian Thanksgiving and American football, which is basically a holiday, then we'll just be chill today. Hey, Zena. Oh, hey, Matt. Yeah, you're from Toronto. That's rad. Time to get into social networking and job prep. That's what we're gonna do today. Job prep, indeed. There are several games every Sunday. Okay. You like this? Oh man, this is like my comfy weekend sweater. I got this secondhand from a family I babysitted for. They just gave me like a bag of secondhand clothes, and I was like, yeah. And so yeah, this is vintage as heck. I think isn't this stripe motif like the early 2000s thing? This might even be a guy's sweater. I don't know. Coding seems easier. I love that you bring that up, Matt. So I've heard that from several people, and I guess I would agree. Is that when you talk about getting a job, learning the coding concepts isn't necessarily hard. Sometimes the hardest thing is doing the networking and answering the behavioral questions. And so that kind of brings us to the subject of today's stream, which is Banki. And somebody asked earlier, well, what the flip is Banki? And so what Banki is if you're in 100 devs, Banki is a set, literally, it's a bank of questions that are both behavioral and technical. And these are questions that are a subset of which are almost guaranteed to come up in job interviews, especially the behavioral questions, which are in this first section here. And these are things that just you are highly likely to be asked. And so you should have an answer kind of queued up and ready to go. Not like you're reading off of a script, but you should have the ideas of how to answer this question already in your brain when you go into an interview. So you can just have it roll off the tongue, sound very natural, and have it portray you in a good light. So basically, these are just standard questions that come up in interviews and that you should practice and learn how to answer so that you can just ace them when they come up. I'm not gonna say if, when they come up in an interview, and sound really confident, really knowledgeable, and make that person want to work with you. Nice and rainy here. 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, this was the style, that stripe like across the top area here. Yeah, it's super comfy though. I love it. It's so hard for me to get excited about Banki. That's the challenge of Banki, is that it's not like an exciting new code concept. It's questions about, it's boring behavioral questions, right? And that's the trap. It makes it hard to study. And so, but even though these kinds of questions are the things that you'll get asked probably more than your coding knowledge. I know in my case, in uh, in my case, when I got my job so I'm currently a senior business intelligence developer for a university here in the U.S. Um, all of my questions were behavioral, like literally these questions here, like all of these questions right here. I didn't get asked all of them, but I got asked certainly several of them. And I had multiple rounds of interviews, and it was just behavioral stuff. It was stuff like, how do you work with others? What's challenges you faced, that kind of thing. And the only technical part of my interview. So just if you were in the T spill on Friday, Daddy Yankee was in there and talking about um, how in their interview, yeah, they only had like one technical question. I don't even remember what it was, or and the majority of their questions were behavioral, and that was exactly what I experienced too. I had one technical question, and they literally just gave me a SQL statement. So that was the language that I was, trying to get a job in, is SQL. And I had a background in SQL, but I literally hadn't done SQL for 3 years. I hadn't written a line of SQL for 3 years at that point, and I was just kind of YOLOing the interview. I was like, I did not think I would get it. I thought it was too advanced for me because I was expecting a ton of technical coding, SQL related questions that I wouldn't be able to answer. But in the end, it was mostly behavioral with one technical question where they gave me a pre written SQL statement, like about a page long. And they just asked me to walk through it and tell them what it was doing. It wasn't even hard. It was just a standard select statement with some joins and like basic SQL stuff. So basically, all they were doing is the behavioral was the important part, and then the technical part was just to make sure I wasn't lying and that I had a basic foundational knowledge of SQL, which I probably could have learned like over a weekend. And so, people put sometimes too much stock in their coding preparation. Maybe I'm not going to say it's worthless. I'm just saying it's don't get out of whack with what's important. Arenzi says, I struggle a lot with networking, working full time, class, IRL stuff. It's hard to schedule everything. Yeah, definitely. I don't disagree. Um, there's a lot to get done, right? But it's important not to neglect the quote unquote boring stuff, such as Banki, right? It reminds me of Joe from Blue's Clues, my sweater. Yeah. It's funny. Or it says, nice fall day here. Fall hasn't quite come where I live, but it's getting there. Twism says, is that on the Discord? Well, if you go right now on Twitch, if you go to Leon's Twitch channel, so the channel where we usually watch class, and you click on chat, and in chat, even though he's offline, you can still type things in chat. If you go to his chat and you type exclamation point Banki, or exclamation point bank, exclamation point BANK, that will give you a direct link to the document. And Rascal also supplied a link there in chat as well. Hey, Andrew-san. Welcome. Yeah. So I am Sazzy has they looked at this question that I had highlighted here, and this was, so we've done these before. We've gone through these behavioral questions before on stream, and we just highlighted each one as we talked about it. And this is apparently where we stopped last time. But they looked at this question and they said, well, if they had to describe a situation where they worked effectively under pressure, they said being an essential worker during COVID and working for a year without a vaccine. Yeah, many of my coworkers got sick or died. Very stressful. Yeah, and so what they're doing there is actually really good. They're taking knowledge from outside of tech, right? The answers to these questions. So, talking about in general how to answer these types of behavioral questions, a lot of people get themselves twisted because they try to answer them. They're like, well, I don't have a tech background. I've never had a role in tech before. I've been working, in a hospital or in a classroom or food service or something like that. And they're like, I don't know how to answer these because I don't have a background in tech. Well, that doesn't matter. They're talking. These are behavioral questions, right? And so you have to try to tie them back to the work you've been doing and help the interviewer get a sense of who you are, how you learn, how you work with others. So it doesn't really matter what the context is, as long as you can tie it effectively to your previous work history and help the interviewer get a peek at who you actually are and how you function. Yeah, and I love Jazzy Pantson's answer there. They say, I think a lot of people overthink what the right answer is. All you have to do is make yourself seem like a decent person that people want to work with. And that is the major, like, that's why they even want to talk to you. That's why they don't just read your resume and go off of that, right? They want to see what type of person is this person? Is this someone that, I could see myself working with every single day? How do they interact? How do they compose themselves in an interview? What's their personality like? Do they show a capacity to learn and grow? Those are the main things that they're looking at. Hey, Rayton, welcome. Yeah, and absolutely. I know a lot of folks are, looking to make that turn into tech because of, what happened during COVID with their employers or with, the general public and that kind of thing. And so those experiences, while they're, really difficult and stressful, they can provide some good answers, some good ways for you to answer some of these questions. Um, so I guess let's kind of start taking a look at these questions. And also too, I wanted to have this kind of chill stream to also give you all some time to ask about any questions that you might have about working as a developer too. So ask me anything, kind of like we did on Friday with Daddy Yankee, asking about what was their interview process like. What is it like day to day working as a developer? I'm happy to share any of that as well if y'all have questions about that. So feel free to ask at any time. Um, I might uh, modify certain small details just to not share sensitive things or whatever, but I will share as much as I possibly can about the experience. Looking for work from home now. Yeah, absolutely. Working from home has been a really great experience so far. And I think I've shared this before, but actually, I actually don't have an office that they could ever force me to go back to. My employer gave up the lease to the office where my team used to work before the pandemic. So before I was on that team, they worked in an office, got sent home during the pandemic, and then my employer just gave up the lease to that building entirely. So we are a team without a home in the best way, because that means they can't ever force us to go back without literally buying another building. So I'm like, yes. But assuming that folks have looked at these questions before, what are some of the questions focusing on the behavioral section? What are some of the questions that people are struggling with, or maybe not sure how to answer, or not sure what the question is asking for? What are some questions that folks aren't sure about? And I'll take the highlight off this one. This was just from our last session. While y'all think, I'm going to take a drink of tea here. It's like I said before, I'm cold. This time of year, I get so cold. Okay, Arenzi says, last couple of questions. Um, that's a big mug. Yes, it is, and I love it. Yes, it is a what is this? A 16-ounce mug, I think. I think this is a 16-ounce mug. It's the best. So I used to work at an e-commerce company that printed custom mugs. and shirts and everything. And so I always used to get all the rejects or the things that customers would return. And so these were my favorite because they're massive. I have two of them. They're great. I wish I would have got more before I left that company. Um, okay, so Renzi says, "What the last couple of questions? Why do you want to work here, and what is your dream job?" Okay, let's see where that at. Where's what number question is that? Sorry, I just want to kind of highlight it so folks can see. Oh, so like this one? Oh, these two here, 17 and 18. I'm just gonna put a highlight on them so people know which ones we're talking about here. Yeah, okay. So why are you interested in this opportunity? So how I would answer that is I would assume that the weekend before you need to have done your research about the company that you're going to be interviewing for. Um, so uh, I before I go into an interview, I always spend several hours researching the company, and especially not just like the general facts about the company, but looking at like I think Leon even mentioned this on Thursday is like looking at or on Friday during the T spill, looking at any initiatives that they've got going on, anything that they have in the news. So any news articles about them, any new products they've just announced, or any new initiatives, because those are likely going to be things that are kind of like high on the company's radar and things that they want to see succeed. And so if you say something like, well, I'm really interested in, so you could say something like, I think I've demonstrated in my projects and in the things X, Y, and Z things on my resume, that I'm really passionate about the specific niche that this company does, whatever their niche is, whether it's full stack web development or back end development or whatever they do. I think that my projects and these things that I have on my resume have really demonstrated that I have a passion for the niche. And then you could also say, and what I'm really interested in is, this initiative, this, let's say, uh, women in coding outreach program that you all have recently launched. I saw that on the news, and seeing that made me feel like you really care about the community, about getting people involved in coding, and that really made your company stand out for me, and I really want to be a part of that initiative in some way. And I saw that that seems to align really closely with this team, um, and so I would like to contribute to the team, to the basic job description, and maybe get involved in this initiative if I can, and learn more about maybe this other initiative that you saw in the news. So um, is that 100% true? Not necessarily, but it aligns with the things that the company is passionate about. And the things that they've demonstrated that they're passionate about because they're sharing them with the news media. So that's kind of how I would answer that opportunity. So tying it to your background, number one, saying like, look, these are the things in my background that show that I am passionate about these things that the company does, and making sure that you understand the basic niche that the company fills. um, you should have that, at least that knowledge, that level of knowledge about the company. What is their niche, what is their thing, and then also anything that you can glean from news articles or press releases or bullet points on the company's website of things that they are currently working on, because that shows that you aren't just in this for an interview, that you have done your homework, that you've learned about the company, that the company has caught your eye, and they're going to want to see that. So that's how I would answer number 17. um, and then for telling me about your dream job, what do you really want to do with your career? I mean, who the heck knows, right? I don't freaking know. I never, I I have no clue where I want to be 5 years from now, let alone 10 years from now. Nobody really can know. Um, but I think the best way to answer number 18 um, is to show that you want to grow in some way. So whether that answer is truthful or not to how you really feel, um, That's funny. Julian says, I want to bang keys on my keyboard and see pretty things flash across the screen. That might be your actual answer, but how you probably want to answer that is to say that you want to grow in some way. Again, you could probably also answer this by saying, over the past year, I have really embraced my passion for, let's say it's web development. I've really embraced my passion for web development. And again, I think my background, makes that very apparent that I have really thrown myself into this passion. And I've, even in the short time that I've been doing this, I've produced some really cool projects and interesting things and worked with some amazing people. And I really want to continue that. I want to deepen my knowledge. And I have some, really interesting projects in my head that I'd like to accomplish. And I think that the mission of this team can allow me to continue to learn and grow in the niche of whatever that niche is. And I want to continue um, to learn and grow and hopefully eventually maybe teach others um, to do the same thing that I did and grow this passion. So basically just tying it to growth and tying it to and tying it to a continued learning journey, I think is important too, because that shows the company that you are willing and able to be molded and shaped in whatever direction they want, which is big, right? They don't want somebody that's going to come in and refuse to learn their way of doing things. They want somebody that is going to come in and can be molded and adapted to fit their way of working and adapted to fit the culture. They don't want somebody that's going to come in and be like, nope, you're not doing it the way that I would do it. I'm not going to learn that. You know, Matt says, I've pivoted every 5 years or so. Yeah. And I mean, that's generally what's going to happen. But is that what the company wants to hear? No. They don't want to hear that they're going to train you up and then that you're going to bail, right? And so you want to come across with the impression that you're going to stick around, um, and that you're going to enmesh that yourself in their culture. Yeah, and in general, that's a great general answer, Jazzy Pants. I'm a big fan of the culture and ideals you embody here, and you would probably at that point you would probably say I'm a big fan of the culture of something, whether that's maybe it's from their mission statement or something like that. Like give us some specific examples of the culture of what, the culture of service, of growth, whatever they say on their mission statement on their website, um, and the ideals, and you could say like the ideals of XYZ, that you embody, and I would love to be a part of it. And then you could say, and the specific mission of thing that was in the news. Hey, piece of shoot. I'm going to catch up with chat here. I missed a few things. Zena says, I can say a million things about myself, but how do I open that sentence? Um, Background or current? I would probably think of a few keywords that, describe me and maybe start out that way. Say, I would probably describe myself as a lifelong learner. I don't like being stagnant at any point. If I ever feel like I'm stagnant in my career, I move on. So that's I would describe if I had to describe myself in a couple words, it would be lifelong learner. So that's probably how I would start to answer that question, is to say like, well, I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. Um, I don't necessarily feel comfortable if I'm not constantly learning, and so I think my background reflects that. And so you could segue into your background that way and rattle off a few of the highlights of things you've done so far, projects or things that you're proud of. Um, and then kind of go into how that shaped the current traits, and how that shaped your current traits about yourself, and accentuating those things that you want to accentuate about your personality or that fit the company, one or the other. Number five. Okay, somebody else asked about number five. Give me an example of a time that you had to take a creative and unusual approach to solve a coding problem. Um, how did this idea come to your mind? Why do you think it was unusual? Okay, so in this case, I'm sure at some point in 100 devs, um, you wanted to do something with a project, or maybe it's your 100 hours project. Have you ever wanted to do something with that project and maybe you just had zero clue how to do it? Or maybe you didn't, maybe you didn't have the knowledge of a certain library or function or something yet, and you kind of had to jury rig something to work. I would say that's probably a good creative or unusual approach. Thinking about when you face sort of an insurmountable problem with one of your projects and had to research how to solve it, or look at multiple different ways of solving it. Maybe the first way didn't work, and you had to try an alternative, or maybe Stack Overflow didn't give you good results, and so you had to ask on the Discord. Um, and so as far as answering this, let's see. Yeah, so and it could be that you don't think of these as being, unusual, so you could maybe focus on like the creative aspect. Um, and if you don't think that you've encountered any unusual problems, maybe you could focus on the creative side. So when's the time that you've had to do something or jury rig something in kind of a weird way to make it work? You knew at the time maybe it wasn't the best solution, quote unquote best, but maybe you jury rigged something and it just worked, and it kind of maybe worked in an unusual way. You could feel free to share that too. And you could say, for the answer of how did this idea come to your mind, maybe you asked on the Discord, and that's perfectly fine to say. You could be like, well, um, I worked together with a community that helped me brainstorm and gave me some suggestions, and I iterated through those suggestions and I tried a few, and finally I landed on this one, and I probably wouldn't have thought of it myself, but I was able to collaborate with some other folks, and together we came up with a solution. Yeah, and it's the unusual that throws me off for that question. So if something really, really throws you off for the question and you really don't feel like you have, a reasonable answer, but you feel like you could answer it in this way from the creative perspective, then just kind of skew the question a little bit. Answer it that way. Um, yeah, Cassava, as far as your question about a search bar, yeah, absolutely. Jazzy Pants is correct. I did do it. I actually did a stream on MongoDB search bars a while back. And so thank you for sharing that, Jazzy Pants. Yeah, we did do that on stream. We did a movie search, didn't we? Yeah. Zena says, I'm afraid I'm always kind of long term with my jobs. I know that software and tech industry be be a lot of trying new companies every couple of years. Am I in trouble? No, I wouldn't say so. Um, No, because as long as you're gaining, Zena, as long as you're gaining skills in your current job and you're keeping track of the things that you're working on, I think that's important for those that stick around with companies for a long time. You can sort of get complacent a little bit and start and stop keeping track of the things you've actually done, and stop keeping track of your accomplishments. And I'm guilty of that. I've been guilty of that before. And then when you finally do go to change jobs, you're like, oh crap, what have I done for the past 3 years or 5 years? What did I even do? And so as long as if you are in one job for a long period of time, keep notes every month or so. Evaluate, okay, what did I accomplish, what am I proud of from the past month? Maybe I helped collaborate with a group and solve a problem. Maybe I taught somebody a skill. Maybe I helped finish a project. Maybe I led a project. So just keep track of those things, and that's the kind of thing that you can talk about in an interview, and you should be fine. So as long as you're not just like stagnating for 5 years, which Zena, I don't think that you are. I'm sure you're doing great things, and so as long as you're keeping track of that and can speak to that in an interview, you'll be fine. Hey, Rask. Yeah, and like Jazzy says, I mean, yeah, you can probably get. They say that the best way to get more pay bumps is by, you know, changing jobs more often, but you don't have to, right? It's your choice. I've been with my current employer, so this is my second job at my current employer, and I stick with them just because I really like the culture, and I like that it gives me that I leave work with enough energy to do stuff like this, to stream in the evenings, to do 100 devs, that I don't feel burnt out all the time, which is something I really needed after my job with a previous employer. And so it just depends on what you want at that point in life, right? Raytown says, would it be bad to say I tried to find a similar feature on another site and use the inspector to see their approach? Yeah, you could say like, I wasn't really coming up with good solutions, or I iterated through several solutions and I collaborated with a few other people, and I wasn't really seeing what I wanted. So I decided to see if I could get some inspiration from other projects, and I used the inspector to look for some examples of this specific thing in the wild, and so I was able to inspect some existing code. And then from there, I was able to build a unique solution, to fit my project specifically using those examples that I found out in the wild. So I was able to kind of go go hunting and find what I needed elsewhere, and cobble those pieces together into something that I could use for my project. Julian says, could doing something hacky, like sticking a hidden input into a form to pass a variable along count? Yeah, probably. If you can tell it in an entertaining way, right? In a way that, um, maybe you kind of build it up a little bit. You're like, I tried, this and this, and I couldn't get it to work. And then I decided to. You could even, depending on the personality of. It depends on the personality of the interviewer, right? If you The best scenario is if you can have a little bit of a slightly jokey back and forth with them, kind of a light, sort of a light conversational relationship. And so I might try to make that into a little bit of a funny story and be like, I tried this and I couldn't get it working, and I spent, I drank 3 cups of coffee and stayed up till midnight, and I just couldn't get it to work. And so in the end, what I decided to do in order to ship that code and get it out the door or get my project working was to just slide a hidden input variable in there and pass that variable along in the form. And I'll tell you what, it worked perfectly. And then you could finalize that story by saying, and now when I have time, I'd love to go back to that project and try to re-implement some of the other solutions that I looked at to see if any of those would work better. And as soon as I get the time, I do plan to do that. So that kind of ties together, like, here's what I tried. Here's a little funny story about how I came to the solution. And then here's what I love to do in the future. So I'm still thinking about this project and still learning new ways to accomplish this goal. Again, coming back to the learning, coming back to the growth, that sort of thing. Thank you for the follow, Domj and Aranx and Vossi and Roblucci and it's 2K1. Thank you for the follows. Straight to see you, yeah. Yeah, Rascal says, so in response to using the inspector, that sounds like research. Yeah. And if you're uncomfortable saying I used the inspector and looked at a bunch of other sites, you could say, well, I did, I stepped back from just trying things. I stepped back and I did a little bit of research, and I looked at some other examples that I could find online. You don't have to say I inspected other sites. You could be like, I went out and I searched for examples. And none of these examples, of course, fit my project exactly. None of these examples were a perfect fit, but what they did is they gave me enough pieces that I could take those pieces and put them together to accomplish what I was trying to do. Oh, Jazzy, I'm glad you found that movie search useful for your client project. That's awesome. Piece of Shoe says, "What do you want to do with your life?" Is that a question for me, or are you asking for help on answering that question? I guess I've never been asked, like in an interview setting, I've never been asked, "What do you want to do with your life?" It's more about the career focus, because I think employers are a little bit like, you might be breaking some laws if if you ask people about like how they want their personal life to go, and make it seem like the interview hinges on that. So I don't know if you'd be asked that specifically. I think probably the more common question is this one here about really laser focusing it on the career, right? And we already did talk about that one. Um, and again, but it's the same answer, right? Nobody really knows what they want to do with their life, but you want to make yourself look good in the interview by saying things like, continuing with my web development growth, or growth in whatever field the company is in, continuing that growth, mentoring others, teaching others, and expanding my skills into other avenues as well. Ryan says it's not much different than keeping a binder of all your certifications. I assume that's in reference to keeping track of the projects that you worked on. Yeah. And I really can't stress that enough, because I actually had that problem so I'd been with the e commerce company that I'd worked at. I'd been there for 3 years at this e commerce company. And it was just like nonstop go, 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 go. Crazy stressful work environment, all that stuff. And stress, one of the symptoms of stress is that it makes you kind of forgetful. It makes your brain not work as well as it should. It makes your memory not work as well as it should. And so I really didn't keep track of the things I'd been involved in. And so when it came to switch employers, I was thinking about, specific projects and things I'd been involved in throughout those 3 years. And I had a hard time kind of just remembering, okay, what did I work on? um, it was rough. And so I learned that lesson. And so then when I switched jobs, as soon as I got into my next job as a data analyst, I actually started keeping a daily log of the things I was working on, like literally just on a piece of paper. I would write little check boxes, and I would write, okay, here's my tasks for the day. And as I completed them, I would check them off. And then for every day, I would take that paper, I would, tear it off, and I would put it in a stack. I would store that. Anything really important, I would circle or highlight. And so then I could just flip through that stack and look for circles and highlights and be like, oh, yeah, that was a really cool thing that I did. I should put that on my resume, or I should put that in my mental bank of things I want to talk about, things I want to talk about in an interview. Um, and so that can be a really easy thing that you can do. Like if I did something cool, I'm going to write it down so I can talk about it later. Yeah, and Matt, I love that. I love that solution, Matt. So I did it by hand, but Matt did it with a Google sheet, which I think is probably a better way to do it. It's more easily searchable than a big stack of paper. Um, and Rask says, "Are you doing 100 devs, or are you part of a previous cohort? Because it seems you have already a lot of experience." Um, So I am a dev currently, but I'm a SQL dev. So I work with databases. And so I've never done web development before. Um, and so, I mean, I've only been a dev for about a year. And actually, when I started 100 devs, I'd only been a dev for 2 months. um, so yeah, I am in the current cohort, and I'm learning a lot of this stuff for the first time. Ryan says she's with the current cohort, but she always seems to be a week ahead of us. And some of that is just fake it till you make it. Now, you may not believe that, but some of it is really just projecting an air of confidence and understanding when one may not always exist. And that's another skill that you can use in an interview. Is sometimes just projecting a little bit, and a little bit of fudging, and that can get you there. That can get you over the line. Yeah. um Zena says Leon and Mine Wolf just have a natural talent for answering these questions. Well, it's not necessarily a talent. Yeah, it takes practice, and the more you practice, like anything, like with anything, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. The more natural you can seem. And another general tip I would just give in just in general, like in any time you're talking to an interviewer or a recruiter or any time when you are verbally speaking, um, try to smile. I know that smiling doesn't come naturally to everyone. And for a lot of women, we've been told to smile at times in our lives when we really didn't feel like smiling. And so that can be uncomfortable and very understandably so. That can be uncomfortable in various ways. But if you are able to turn up the corners of your mouth, that is something that people can hear. It makes a verbal difference in your voice. Um, yeah, piece of sheet says that was super boomer of you. I know it is. It can be an uncomfortable thing, and so that's why I wanted to acknowledge that. But it does make a verbal difference in the sound of your voice, how your voice sounds, especially on the phone. And so, as an example, when I did an interview for my second job, I was in the back. I was sitting in the back seat of my car in a busy car park, and it was really uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be there. But it was a phone interview, so I kept the corners of my mouth turned up, and it sounded personable. And the interviewer actually remarked on it later. They said, "Oh, wow, you sounded like." Because I was joking with them later about the situation I'd been in when I did that interview, like just sitting in the back of a car, it was super uncomfortable, and they're like, "Oh, we couldn't tell, I wouldn't have known." So that can just be one. Again, it's not something that's a requirement. It's just another way to open a door, right? All right, catching up with chat again. Yeah, and reframing, that's a great way to put it. I love that way of putting it, Julian. So reframing inexperience as creativity, right? Yeah. So instead of saying, well, I had no idea how to do this, you'd say, like, well, um, I was brainstorming with these other people and we were coming up with all these solutions. And so, trying to figure out which one to implement was really hard. So I looked for examples online to see how other people were doing this so that I could, you know, potentially use the best solution. So instead of saying I had no idea how to do this and I copied something that I saw on the internet, say, well, I was doing brainstorming, we had all these different options, and so I looked online to see how it was really being implemented and then put together something, using those pieces to make the best implementation that I could. It's all about reframing. Hurt says Google Sheets for the win. I have so many this at this point for this class alone. Yeah, Google Sheets can be a great way to organize. I want to do at some point. I want to do a class or a stream after probably after the cohort is actually over. I want to do a stream on Excel for people that aren't experienced with it because it's such a useful tool. Excel and or Google Sheets. I'm not sure which one. Zena says it's hard for me not to smile when I talk about 100 devs. Oh, that's great. And Rask says that technique, so smiling or at least pretending to, is number one of sales training over the phone. Yeah, it literally makes your voice sound different. So if I slack my face like this, you can tell that my voice doesn't sound the same anymore. But when I smile, my voice becomes much more dynamic, and it just sounds more personable. Yeah, and that Chris coming in with a great suggestion. So I would highly encourage recording yourself and playing back some practice with interviewing in Banki. So I've actually done that in prepping for interviews in the past, especially when I was talking about concepts I wasn't really familiar with. So maybe like company initiatives, like that I'd done some research on, but I wasn't I didn't really have any background on them. In order to figure out how confident I was sounding when I was talking about those things, I would record myself and play it back and be like, do I sound like I know what I'm talking about? Or do I sound like I'm just BSing here? Just getting into it now that I'm pushing through JS. Leon sold me about Banky. Rask says, I haven't started Banky yet, but my most feared questions are about my last position, business director. I'll need to craft a nice story around that career change. So, What are you concerned about with that? I'm just curious. What are you concerned about with that career change specifically? Was it that you feel like it wasn't close enough to tech, or because business director sounds impressive on paper? I mean, it sounds like you're able to develop business processes. It sounds like you're able to manage others. It sounds like you're able to potentially, prioritize projects. So those three things are very important for to be in a dev role. So what are your concerns about that career shift specifically? Yeah, and talking about Google Sheets versus Excel, that's so I'm most familiar with Excel, but pretty much Google Sheets is like a cloud version of Excel, and so a lot of the same principles apply. So I might end up talking about Google Sheets instead, just because everyone has access to that, and I don't ever want to necessarily teach folks something that's behind a paywall, where like Excel is. And so we may cover Google Sheets. We'll see. I have to think about, what I want to talk about and all that sort of thing. With some minor annoying differences. Yeah, yeah. There's definitely differences. And Rask says, do you use Power BI at work? Have you tried Dash? So we use excuse me. Um, we use Oracle as a backend, and then we use Cognos as a front end. So it's another visualizer. It's similar to Power BI, Cognos and Tableau. So Cognos for more of just big data pulls, and then Tableau for visualizations. But yeah, I know Power BI is kind of the current hotness. Uh, it's backed by Microsoft, but we don't really use it at my work. We've experimented with it a little bit. I actually have it installed. I have the desktop version installed on my machine, but I've only really just played with it a little. Oh, okay. Rask says so. They're concerned. So Rask was asking about, or saying that they were concerned about their previous role as a business director, and I asked why that was, and they say, well, the concern is that it will lead me again to pure management. I left because I had to fire a lot of people during COVID. That was my first director experience, and I hated every second. Oof, yeah. I actually hacked my way into that position using Python to automate repetitive tasks. Um, yeah, and they said that's why I struggle. That's what I struggle with. I was a bartender for a while, and I'm having trouble relating it to software engineering. And so, what's that principle? What's that principle? Is it the Peter principle where you get, I might have the wrong one, but I know there's a principle where you get promoted. They say that you get promoted just past like your level of comfort or confidence or competence, right? If you're good, you will always be promoted just one level higher than you should be, or than is maybe a good fit for you, right? And I'm not saying that you were a bad director, Rask. I'm just saying that you said that you hacked you were so good at um, Python that you got promoted and promoted and promoted all the way up to director, and then that turned out to be a terrible fit. um, and then so you could frame that. You don't have to be dishonest about your experience as a director, but you could say, if the question comes up in an interview, let's say you're interviewing for just like a dev position, a standard dev position, they could say, well, I see you on the resume here, it says you were a director at some point. Um, what's led you to this role? That could be a very valid question. What's led you to this role? And you could answer that by saying, well, I worked really hard to get into that to get into that director role, and you could list off some of the accomplishments, and my management at that time, assigned me to that role. However, I found that my passion was not necessarily in managing people. I was grateful for the opportunity to try that role, but I found myself getting too far away from what I actually enjoy, which is writing code. I really enjoy writing code. I enjoy delivering products. I enjoy collaborating directly with my team and assisting them on these projects, sort of down in the trenches, as it were. And when you're a director, you don't get to do that very much. Instead, what you find yourself doing is, managing personnel rather than code. And I find that my strengths are really in code. And so that's what I would like to get back to. I would like to get back to what I really love and what I'm really good at. And I think my projects, X, Y, and Z reflect that is truly my passion. And so that's what I'm trying to get back to. And I'm sure that, and I'm sure that you can see that from my past, that is really my passion. And I hope to get back to that. So I would say that's the quickest way to shut that kind of thing down. To say like, well, you know, you have management experience. Why aren't you a manager? Well, just saying like, look, I tried it. I was grateful for the opportunity. Um, and I found that I was getting too far away from coding, which is what I'm here for. And so that's what I'm getting back to that's what I hope to get back to with this position. So that's how I would answer that. Saying nothing about firing people, saying nothing about any of the negatives, just saying that you tried it and you like coding more than managing. That's a perfectly valid answer. I hope that helps. And saying I was a bartender for a while, um, and I'm having trouble relating it to software engineering. So bartending. Um, I would say with bartending, probably one of the hardest things to do is that you are juggling multiple customers at once. So you are juggling priorities, right? You've got 10 people lined up at the bar and they've all got their money out and they want their drinks, right? They're just they don't want to stay there at the bar. They want their drink and they want to go dance, or I don't know what kind of a venue you worked at, but they want to go dance or they want to go do something else, right? They don't want to keep waiting on their drink. And especially you might be dealing with people who are slightly impaired and impatient. Um, and so a way you could answer that is, I found that my experience as a bartender really helped me juggle dealing with multiple priorities at once, keeping multiple priorities in my head, going around keeping drink recipes in my mind, keeping track of credit cards, keeping track of cash and delivering change. Basically, I mean, I was juggling, you could say, you could put a number to that. I was juggling, 10 and 20, between 10 and 20 patrons at once. And also dealing with multiple personalities, so I feel like I can read people really well. I feel like I can have casual interactions and relate to people really well. And kind of, handle these stressful situations with aplomb. Being a bartender helped me learn how to juggle 10 to 20 hard alcohol bottles at the same time. And you could slide that in there depending on how the interview is going. You could even slide something like that in there as a little joke. Be like, I was in that job. I learned how to manage, between 10 to 20 people at the same time, and 10 to 20 bottles of alcohol. Juggle, you could slide a little humor in there. Um, but again, that can depend on the interview. Yeah, it's about stress. It's you if you're talking about the bartending job, I would emphasize the pressure, the stress, and how you kept cool and collected and got your work done in that incredibly stressful environment. Um, oh, Bevel's a bartender too. That's rad. Chelsea says, I did something similar to Banki when preparing for my interview for my current position. It was an internal position at the company I already worked with. Same here. I stumbled upon a document in the company intranet with all the possible interview questions. Whoa! Oh, that's rad. I called this research. Absolutely. That's 100% research. You got the insider scoop. That's so cool. I studied and practiced answering those questions and was able to answer their questions super confidently. I imagine. Well, the important thing is, right, you took those questions and you studied them. And that's literally what we're doing here, right? You studied them until you became confident. Because if you had just found those questions and, maybe read them once or twice and then got into the interview, it wouldn't have mattered whether you had them or not, because you wouldn't have thought about the content and how to answer them. And so, yeah, you literally did Banky. And I didn't have the inside scoop prior to my last job interview and where I got this current position. I didn't have that inside scoop, but I did do something very similar to Banky. So I went online and I just searched for common interview questions, right? I just did Google searches. So that's why I'm so glad you all have the bank, because it makes it so much easier. I just did a bunch of searches for common interview questions and I literally printed them out I'm not a boomer, but sometimes I act like one. I printed them out on paper and I just practiced going down the list and answering, these questions printed out from web pages, until I could answer them confidently. And I had an internal sort of a database of things I wanted to highlight and talk about. So I was never caught on the back foot, right? I always had things in my head of like, oh, this thing that I did in the past roughly fits the answer to this question. I can speak to this. So I would never have that time when I just was deer in the headlights, didn't know how to answer. So even if you aren't using the bank, um, just practice something, right? The bottom line here is you got to rehearse, you got to practice so that you can go into that interview with confidence. Yeah, and Bevel, that's another great angle. So Bevel, who is also a bartender, talking about this kind of skills that you gain from doing that work. And I've never been a bartender, so I'm glad that Bevel was able to share. Um, they say I like to focus on bartending because it helps me to be a great communicator. Yeah, so you gotta communicate with a ton of people, for your entire shift. I'm sure you got to talk to people. You can't just be standing there behind the bar pouring drinks. You got to be that you got to create that rapport, that back and forth. Zena says, What if most of my answers um, are unrelated to tech? That's fine. That's fine. Um, yeah, tie them into tech requirement at the company, as long as it's natural. I mean, if you can, that's great. As long as it's not like a really weird segue. I would say just, try to answer honestly with your past experiences if you can. Um, so I would say, for my interview for this senior role that I'm in now, I had never been a dev before. I had worked in data. I'd been a data analyst before. And so really none of my questions were related to being a developer because I'd never been a dev before. And so I just answered with previous things that I'd done in my data analyst job or my operations manager job, um, as much as I could. It's not necessarily that I had to tie it to the specific stack that the company was using, but it was more of, again, just showing that I'm able to learn, that I'm able to collaborate, and that I am moldable and shapeable, I guess, by the company, and that I seem like a cool person to work with. Lord Chrisicus says, I just finished the last section of the bank today. Nice. Been going through one section at a time and adding to Anki. Matt says, good job, by the way, Lord. Matt says, best boss I ever had, learned sales management working at K. Is that is that like a bartending thing? I guess I don't know what that is. Okay, so we did 17 and 18, and we also did number 5. What other questions do we want to see? I'll highlight these two. Any other questions that folks are struggling with? Big box restaurant. Okay, yeah. I feel like people, just the kind of the vibe that I get from folks in chat previously when we've done these previous discussions, um, is people tend to discount their own experience in food service, like especially like people are like, oh, I was just, I don't know, I was just a waiter or waitress, or I don't know, worked for a restaurant, and people really discount that. They discount their own skills, and I feel like food service is like incredible. It gives you an incredible set of skills. Again, it gives you, those communication skills, it gives you time management skills, it gives you stress management skills. um, it allows you, you deal with prioritization, um, prioritizing orders, prioritizing sales, whatever, collaboration with all the other members of your team, whether you're on a team of waiters or a team of cooks or front house staff. You're working with a team constantly, and so you end up with an incredible set of skills. And so it's important not to toss those aside because they're just, from a restaurant. Um, yeah, absolutely. Food service or any type of public facing role. And that's not to say that any public facing role is, better than the other for tech skills or whatever. They're all amazing. I just happen to notice that a lot of folks are, seem to devalue their own experience working in food service, which is like, no, that's amazing. I couldn't do that. Like, geez, you get so many great skills that way. It's super valuable experience. Yeah. Because tech is not any different than working with people in any other capacity, right? You get to sit down more when you're working on a team of developers. You get to sit more, um, but I mean, you're still working with people, right? You're still working with multiple priorities. You're still working with stressful situations, on occasion, not all the time. At least at a good employer, not all the time. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's people are still people. No matter where you go, people are still people. So if you can deal with people, you got a leg up already. Um, okay, so somebody said number 14. All right. So tell me about your experience at 100 devs. Yeah, so this is actually should be a pretty fun one for a lot of us to discuss. So you could say something like, yeah, so I worked for 100 devs for about a year at this agency. And during that time, I had a lot of wonderful opportunities. Um, I attended I, I attended regular seminars on various coding concepts, whether it was JavaScript or React or whatever things you want to highlight from your resume, whatever of the many skills that we learned. So highlighting a few things there. I attended all these seminars. I also got the chance to work on several collaborative projects with other folks developing full stack apps from start to finish. I mean, working with a different team every time, working with different types of people every time. And here you might highlight a few of those specific projects that you worked on, maybe saying something or anything interesting that happened when you worked on a team. And I also, that's also 100 Devs also is where I found my first client as well. So I was able to, if you look at here on my resume, it was this project right here. And that's where I was able to get my first client and build their website. And that website, if you want to visit it, it's still up today. You're welcome to take a look. And also, I was able to really enhance my GitHub and really highlight a lot of my past accomplishments that way, using some of the things that I learned in 100 Devs. Um, so again, highlighting that's probably kind of how I would answer that question is just getting excited about it, being like, wow, yeah, great experience. I got to work with multiple teams. I got to deliver client projects, including, listing the ones on your resume, like this one and this one. Um, and I attended several seminars, and it helped flesh out my knowledge of JavaScript and React and Node, whatever. So again, accentuating the collaborative nature, accentuating the projects, like the real accomplishments that you can point to on your resume, um, and even encouraging the interviewer to say like, yeah, and if you want to see some of that stuff, check out my GitHub, and here's the concrete things that I worked on with 100 devs. Um, so you don't. It's you shouldn't be ashamed of it, right? It's not anything to be ashamed. A one-time lack of knowledge is not anything to be ashamed of, because what we've shown here is that you're not that person anymore. You've grown, and now you have the knowledge, and so now it's like, yeah, and this is how I got there. Isn't that cool? Isn't it so cool how I built my knowledge up through this amazing program? So again, just focusing on in whatever way you can, focusing on the positives, focusing on the growth, focusing on how well you learn, because again, that's what your employer is looking for. Confidence builder, good. Quinsab says you could also highlight the full week of Microsoft focused products. Yeah, I mean, you could, talk about strengthening your knowledge with Git and GitHub, those type, because a lot of employers do use Git and GitHub as their repos, right? For all their code repos. My employer doesn't, but they're weird. So, but most do. And so you could say, yeah, strengthen my knowledge of Git and GitHub and really hone my skills there on those products. Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to continue this conversation, but it is time for a break. So let's take 5 minutes and we'll take a break and think about, um, other questions that you'd like me to brainstorm answers for, or even if you want me to answer something from your specific background, like you maybe your current job, you're not sure how to fit that into an interview setting, or what to emphasize about your current job. So feel free to think about that during the break. And when we come back, we can brainstorm a few more answers to these questions or kind of tailor things to your specific background. Oh yeah, number 19 is a really good one. Yeah, don't let me forget about that, Sazzy. We'll talk about number 19 after the break. Number 19 is tell me about a time when you failed, which is that's a great question. I love that question. All right. Um, so let's put 5 minutes on the clock. All right, I will go get up, stretch, hydrate, whatever. Tune into the football game that's apparently happening, and then I will see you back here in 5. And I'm gonna do. I'll go ahead and do that hydrate and posture check right now. Thank you for that posture check. Oof. All right. See you back here in a few. Go local sports team. Yeah. Play well. Hey, Ian, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, welcome. We're on a break at the moment, but we'll be back to it in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And today we are actually talking about behavioral interview questions. So, the types of behavioral questions that you might get asked in an interview that might be kind of tough to answer for some folks. You might know all the code in the world, but maybe you don't know how to talk about yourself. And so that's what we're kind of practicing today. So if you want to stick around, if you are having trouble with behavioral questions in interviews, you are welcome to stick around with us today. Thank you again for the raid. Conquest says, I wish I had that problem. Well, if you're good at talking about yourself, then feel free to stick around and maybe share some of that insight with some of the other folks in chat as well. Again, thank you for the raid. All right, I'm going to go back on mute here for the last minute of the raid. Let folks continue their break. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the timer. We are done with our break, so let's get back to it. And we're going to get to talk about, actually, we're going to get to talk about one of my favorite behavioral questions because it's so awkward for a lot of people. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to answer this in a way that makes me look, that makes me look good. Like, so the question we're going to talk about is, um, tell me about a time when you failed. So I'm going to highlight this in orange so folks can see it. Um, so yeah, the question is, tell me about a time when you failed. And so the important way to answer this question is to talk about a time when things didn't go well, but then to emphasize your actions in the immediate aftermath. Okay, how did you attempt damage control or cleanup in a healthy way, and then what have you done since then to either correct that problem or to re-educate yourself if you made a mistake due to lack of knowledge. How did you prevent that from happening again in the future? And so I'll talk about how I would answer that question. Um, and I love this because this has taken a story that used to be really like the kind of thing that like I would wake up at night and just go like, oh God, why did I do that? The kind of thing that used to really embarrass me, and now I'm able to turn it around and use it as an answer for this question, so it doesn't embarrass me anymore. And so yeah, a time when I failed. So I was in my first week. Um, at a job I was really excited about. I had just gotten a job as a data analyst, and I had a manager that I really liked, and I was given my first project. And I really wanted to impress this manager. I thought she was so cool and so nice, and I really wanted to impress her. And I wanted to show her that I already knew everything, and that I would just immediately hit the ground running with all this work that I was being given. So you can probably see some red flags start to wave there based on what we know about starting a new job. So essentially she gave me the task of pulling together a bunch of data, and then it was quite a large volume of data, and then summarizing that data to gain some specific insights that her manager wanted. So essentially, there was this large data analytic task, and she had passed that task on to me as what she thought might be a good first project. Um, and so my failure here is that I essentially went heads down for like the next couple weeks. I was heads down working on this project, determined to get it right the first time, and also show that I knew everything already. And so at the end of those couple weeks, she kind of came over and she's like, "Yeah, so how's that project going that I gave you?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, can we schedule a meeting? I want to show you what I have." I'd put together graphs, I'd put together charts, I'd put together tables. It was all very visually impressive. Um, and so I sat down with her in a meeting room and I started showing her all this stuff. And I still remember her face. She was just like, the hell? Like, not intentionally, but she was, and at the end, she's very polite about it, but she basically just said, this is not what I was looking for at all. This is not, no, this is wrong. Like, completely wrong. I had completely 100% missed the mark and done, like 80 hours worth of work that was completely used, not even close. Exactly. Piece of shoot. Yeah. It was wrong. I had started off on it, you have one small deviation at the start and it just keeps getting worse, right? Um, and so yeah, I completely screwed it up. And my failure was that I at no point did I ask her clarifying questions to make sure that I was on the right track. So that was my failure, is that I wanted to prove that I knew everything right away, and so I didn't ask those clarifying questions and get her input at crucial points in the process. um, and so what I did immediately in the aftermath of that is, after the initial shock had had died down, after my initial mortifying, those feelings of like terror and that I was going to get fired, had died down, I was still in the room with her, and I said, okay, so yeah, this isn't what you're looking for. And I apologize for that. That was my mistake. I should have asked better questions. And I said, I pledge that, you know, I would like another chance to redo this data, but what I'd like to do is kind of send you progress reports on the data that I'm pulling together. So the first thing I'd like to do is sit down with you and get better ground rules for how this project is supposed to go and the data that I'm supposed to be looking at. And I'm also going to collaborate with you, hopefully just a little 5-minute checkup daily, a little stand up on how things are going and what I've done today to pull this data together for you. And on all future projects, I pledge that I will always ask clarifying questions whenever I need to. Probably the most crucial thing that I said is I will not let this situation happen again. And I meant it, and I haven't ever since then. Never made that mistake again. I always now, no matter how you sometimes you have that twinge of, oh, if I ask this question, maybe I'll sound stupid. I always ask the question because I've seen what it can do when I don't ask that question. And so, you always want to clarify. You always want to be clear on starting a project. You got to be clear on the requirements, and throughout that project, you got to make sure that you and the stakeholders are in alignment. And so, that's how I would answer that question. Is so again, the general frame. The best way to answer this question is to describe the failure, yes, but then immediately say, all right, how did I rectify it in the immediate aftermath? How did I clean this mess up? And then going forward, what have I done to mitigate that situation ever happening again? How did I grow from that? How did I grow from that situation? So those are the things that you need to cover when answering that question. You outweigh the one bad, you outweigh the mistake with everything you've done since then to learn and grow. But yes, that's probably the most mortified I've ever been in a professional setting. Because yeah, it was not good. Yeah, and it also and Hertz says that's a great answer because it shows you recognize exactly where you erred and would approach it differently. Absolutely, yeah, it shows that I clearly recognize where I screwed up, how I screwed up, and what needs to be done differently in the future. Yep. Chelsea says, "Is it okay if the best example you have for a question happened quite a long time ago, like 10 years?" They don't got to know that. You could always just say, at a previous on a previous project. You don't got to say this was 10 years ago. Don't snitch on yourself. In a previous project, such and such happened. I mean, if you're wanting to emphasize long term growth, you could say, yeah, about 10 years ago, I was doing this, and this happened. Or if you don't, then don't say it was 10 years ago. You control the flow of information. Now, pick the best example, Chelsea. Yeah, change what information you share to fit the best outcome for answering that question. So again, you don't got to say it was 10 years ago. Um, or say it was 10 years ago if that fits better. I mean, you say what you want to say. Rascal says, yeah, they're not going to ask, and what time of day did this occur? Yes. Spaghetti says, I can't remember what I coded yesterday during scrums. So we actually touched on that a little bit earlier, Spaghetti. We said that, yeah, that can be really hard, especially if you are, in a position that may be kind of stressful, because stress legitimately messes with your memory. It can mess with the ability to write memories in your head. And so the best thing you can do about that is anytime you accomplish something that you're proud of or something you feel like, yes, this would be gold for an interview, just write it down. Put it as several folks have said, they use Google Sheets and they track those types of things in Google Sheets so that you can search for them later or filter on them later. So legit, write it down if you do something cool. And Gakwa says, so keep it to the profession. No, you don't have to. You can modify these answers um, to be sort of agnostic of tech or whatever. If you've never had a tech role before, then don't emphasize that. Just be like, on a previous project, even if you were collaborating in like a, I don't know, for in like a warehouse job, building a bunch of shelving units or something. Just be like, in a previous project, here's what I did. Chelsea says it was so talking about the thing that happened 10 years ago. It was obviously a big failure since I remember it so well. Yeah, and then that can give you passion when you're talking about it. If it's a clear memory for you, that can make it easier to talk about. Like I mean, obviously, I can talk about that failure that I explained. I can talk about that really well because it pretty much ingrained itself in my brain as the type of thing that wakes you up at night. And so you can speak to it really well. You don't have to be ashamed to it of it. Those bold memories can actually serve you well because you can speak to them so well. Mavaholic says, I definitely think I need to do that, talking about writing things down. I feel like I'm always stressed. Yeah. And um, yeah, and that's legit. Is that yeah? It's stress messes with your brain. It can make things less clear. It can make details become warped in your head. It can make things kind of fall out of your brain, especially if they're work related and you don't like thinking about work. So writing things down is absolutely legit, and you should do it so that you can actually speak to things that you're proud of. And another thing that stress does, if you're in a stressful work environment, is it can make you dwell it can make you dwell on the negative more. It can make you dwell on the negative things that have happened to you because that's your brain going into fight or flight mode, right? Your brain is like, I got to protect myself. I got to think about the bad things so that, I can protect myself. And so it can make you forget about the good things that have happened or the good things that you've done. And so, again, that's why it's important to document those things and have them on hand so you can reference them later. I am Says he says, speaking of stress, oh, this is a good question. Speaking of stress, how do we vet potential companies to work for in terms of job stress? That is something we can ask current employees when we are networking. Yes, is that the best way to go about it? Yeah. So you might not say like, is this job high stress? I mean, it depends on the relationship that you have with that person. But you could just say like, a really good question is, so what does the company culture feel like day to day, what's the culture like outside of the mission statement, because the companies, yeah, are going to have a mission statement and we value, work life balance and inclusion, whatever. That doesn't mean anything. So you can ask the question, what's the day to day culture like? And you can usually get a decent feel for what the company is actually like that way. So they might give a kind of a wry, sarcastic answer, like, oh, living the dream. Then, okay, you might be like, wait, hang on, a little bit of a red flag there. Or they might be honest and they might say, yeah, so the culture is really cyclical. There's times of years when we're just sitting around twiddling our thumbs, and there's times of year that are super high stress. Um, so in the very stressful e-commerce job that I worked for 3 years, if somebody would have asked me, so what's the day-to-day culture like? I probably would have answered something like, yeah, so I really love my coworkers. We all collaborate really well. We have a really sort of a loose collaboration style. Um, I would say that the workload is really, really varies really a lot depending on the time of year. So at Christmas time, we get a lot of orders in, and we're working, you know, 60 to 80-hour weeks at Christmas time. Now, again, this is not my current job. I'm talking about a former employer. But yeah, we work 60 to 80-hour weeks at Christmas time. It can be really hard. We work right up and through certain holidays. Um, and so it just depends on whether you're set up to handle that type of a workload, or want to shoulder that additional cyclical burden, because there are times of year then we don't have enough work and we shut the plant down early. So yeah, it can just vary a lot. And so if I was hearing that from someone else, that would be a red flag to me, right? As soon as I hear 60 to 80-hour weeks, I would be like, nope, I'm gone. And so, I think that if you don't come at it um, from like a specifically asking about stress, that's the kind of thing that tends to kind of come out. Employers are gonna, or even sometimes interviewers are gonna want to kind of warn you away from that type of an environment. Yeah, exactly. What does a day in the job look like? And I like to emphasize that word of culture, so that way they aren't just talking about, oh, here's what I do, technical, like from a technical perspective, that they actually do focus on the relationships with employees a little bit. Um, yeah. And Gagma says, d- talking about notepad files that have speak from tragic experience. Yeah. Uh, okay, thanks. 60 to 80 hour work weeks are in the past for me. Yeah, and so you do, if you can, you do want to try to vet the culture of the company from the people that work there. Another way that you can do that is via Glassdoor, which is a website where people can review companies. And leave some fairly scathing reviews sometimes, and by job title too, which can be very helpful. So you can, because sometimes companies are really segmented in the way they operate, and certain departments have different cultures than other departments. So a lot of times you're not going to have a unified global company culture, right? Different departments are going to have their own microcultures within them, because culture is generally dictated by management. And so the director of that department is going to have a way that things are done, and that's going to trickle down to all the subordinates. um, Especially at large employers, at big companies, they're going to have microcosms of culture within them. And so if you can go to Glassdoor or coffee chats or whatever, and talk to people with that job title that you are aspiring to within that company, like specifically, like if you want to be a developer, you can say, like, target that developer, look on Glassdoor for reviews by developers, and okay, what is it like to be a dev here? Yeah, and coffee chats. Yep, coffee chats are great for that, because a lot of times folks are going to be super open about what it's like. Is it a good fit? Is it a bad fit? Is it stressful? Is it not? Yeah, because yeah, stress is you might think like, oh, I can do this. It's my first dev job. I can put my nose to the grindstone and do it. I can power through. Um, I would caution about that from personal experience. That e-commerce company that I worked for, did I learn a lot? Yes, I learned a ton. As far as technical skill, it was great, um, but it pretty much tanked my mental health for a very long time. And so you just gotta be careful. Yep, work life balance is so important, and it sometimes you gotta have a bad experience in order to fully grasp that. Yep, yep. Now I would say my work life balance is incredible. Um, I'm done at 5 p.m. and I can do whatever the heck I want until work starts the next day. And occasionally I'm on call and I get calls at night for systems going down or whatever, but I always know that I can contact somebody else on my team if I need help. Say like, hey, I don't know how to I don't know how to get this process running again. How do I fix it? And I know that somebody will pick up the phone. And so, I have a safety net there as well. That's it. Yeah. So that's another way to interpret. Yeah. So when we talk about work life, there's no balance. Life should be top priority. Yeah. And if you can find an employer that respects that, that's pretty much amazing. Again, that's another reason why I love my current employer. Um, if I have a doctor's appointment, if I got to take my dog to daycare, if I don't know, just need a break for 20 minutes, um, I can go do it. I don't have to worry about whether somebody's looking over my shoulder, or, you know, obviously, if anything is urgent, I get it done and then I go do the other thing. But they trust me to prioritize my time and make sure that I'm getting done what needs to be done. So, an excellent example. So I have, once every other week, I have just a 30-minute call with my manager, and we just talk about what's going on, whether that's projects, maybe things I need help with, or things I need, a manager to kind of nudge a little bit for me, or even things in personal life. And so, last year, when my cat passed away, obviously that was pretty tough. And I mentioned it to the manager, and he immediately said, he was like, hey, if you need to take, if you ever during the day, if it ever just gets to be too much and you need 30 minutes to go and just like take a walk, or just breathe, or do whatever you got to do, like, go do it. Don't worry about that. Do whatever you got to do to feel okay. And I appreciated that so much because, as Piece of Shoot said, yeah, life should come first, right? You should respect your emotional health, so that you can then turn around and do the work effectively. And so, if you can find an employer that does that, you're golden. And yeah, and the thing was, it wasn't just words. He really meant it. He was really like, yeah, I mean, go do that. And I did. And that helped so much. So, and that's not necessarily something you can figure out just in an interview. And so, again, yeah, if you can talk to current employees or hear from current employees, and they might say like, yeah, my manager was so supportive, um, when my parent passed away or when my dog passed away or something like that. That then if you hear stuff like that, then it's like, okay, wow, that's a good employer. Yeah, no, they are, and um, that's why I really like my current employer. My pay is maybe not necessarily as high as it could be somewhere else, but for me, just personally, I'm not saying this is true for everyone. For me, just personally, the cultural and the cultural benefits, the health benefits, the mental health benefits outweigh the fact that I could be making a little bit more money somewhere else. Human empathy, yeah. Yeah, it can be hard to find. And in contrast, my previous employer, the e-commerce company, they would say verbally, we're a family. If you hear we're a family, friggin' run. I'll just say that. um, so they would always say we're a family and then never mean it. It was always just words versus actions. Yeah. Okay, so what other questions here on this list would you need help with, or what other types of past experiences do you have that you might be struggling to relate to these behavioral questions? I'm happy to help frame those answers in that way. Bossman says, "Do you post your VODs to YouTube?" Yes, I do. If you type, oh yeah, Quinn Saab already did it. There's a direct link to my YouTube channel. I still have a few more I need to post. Some of my more recent stuff I need to post up there. I just haven't had time to finish doing that yet. But I'm pretty caught up as of like the beginning of uh, last month. I am Sazzy says, does anybody know if software engineers have to work overtime or on call time? Maybe it depends on the company. Yeah. So at my current company, yes, I do have to work on call time. I'm on call about once a month ish, and that's for a week at a time. So I go on call on a Tuesday, and then I go off call by the next Tuesday. So it's a 7 day period. I'm on call. I could be called at any point during that period, including during the night. Um, However, if there is a major issue that I spend a great deal of time working on, like outside of work hours, so let's if I spend a few hours on an issue outside of work hours, then um, I essentially I'm given free reign to take that time off during the next work week. So, did I spend 3 hours on an on call issue? Yes. Okay. Then take 3 hours off. You know, the next Friday or something like that, and I wouldn't have to put in PTO for that. Um, and so trying to keep it still down to 40 hours, even if I do have occasional calls. And it's really not bad. I don't mind it in the slightest. Having come from the those 60 to 80 hour weeks, taking the occasional call, and not saying it's a regular thing, taking the occasional call in my off hours really isn't a big deal. And another thing too that I really like is that my employer focuses on, so if we have a major issue that results in on call hours, um, we have like a post-mortem meeting on every call switch. So we document every call that we get, and then we have like a post-mortem meeting at the end of every on-call week. So that next Tuesday we all go into a meeting and we talk about the calls that we got and whether there's anything that we can do to mitigate those calls. So like, all right, this issue keeps popping up. Like I keep getting a call about this particular process and I have to do the same thing to fix it every time. So is there anything that we can do to stop this from happening again. What can we do? Let's brainstorm together and think about what we can do to stop this from happening again. And sometimes we can solve it, or sometimes we reach out to another team to be like, hey, your process is failing and I'm getting calls. Fix your stuff. So just talking about solutions. We can't solve everything, but we talk about how they can be handled, or maybe handled better. Like maybe what I did, you know, wasn't the best way to solve it. And so, all right, what should we do next time? Yeah. CD says, how often are after hours work needed, like being on call? So it for me, it depends on the size of the team. So we everybody gets their equal share of being on call. And so actually our team just got bigger. We just hired 3 new developers. So that means I'll probably only have to be on call. Well, of course, once they get trained up, it's going to take them several months to get up to speed. But once they get trained up, I'll probably only have to be on call like once every other month, which is really not bad at all. Drunk Uncle says, perfect stream time. I have a follow up behavioral interview tomorrow. Oh, that's so cool. Good luck. Hurt says, I know Mayan has had streams where she had to monitor her phone on specific days. That's true. Yep. And I did get a call one time. We were on stream here and I got a call. But luckily, it was a very simple issue. I just restarted a process. And actually, subsequently, we have done a lot to correct for those simple process restarts. So in our weekly meetings, we talked about how we keep getting these types of calls, and we worked with the network team to fix the problem, or at least mitigate it. And I think those calls have been greatly reduced. Um, Bossman says, see, where is that at? Sorry, I lost it. Oh, Bossman says, can you go through why do you want to work for us, for big companies? Yeah, so we did talk about this a little bit before, and it's all about doing your research, right? Before, don't go in there with some generic answer. Be like, well, I just like to code or something like that. Do your research beforehand on the company, and particularly look for any news articles about the company, or go to the company website and look for their like news page, and look for the things that they have chosen to highlight, or the things that they have chosen to send to the news media as articles, right? Because those are going to be the things that the company is proud of, and look for specifically things that are related to the tech sector, or things you might feel that the team could have a stake in, or something like that. And when you answer that question about why do you want to work for us, um, be sure that you say something, talk about the specific things that the company does that you're passionate about, and throw in there those some of the specific initiatives. Be like, yeah, I saw that. I think the example that I said earlier was, assuming you're applying to a company and you see that they have a news article that they are supporting, the women in coding initiative in your local metro area. So say like, yeah, so I saw in the news that you all are supporting this women in coding initiative, and I just thought that was really amazing. And I wish I had something like that when I was in high school to teach me about coding, and that really made me impressed with your commitment to the local community. And that's something, if I was a part of this company, I would love to be a part of that, to help foster that local talent, in women and in others, and really help support that initiative as well. So just showing that you've done your research, that you understand the company's mission, that you understand what they're currently involved in and what their current passions are as a company, can really help you go far in answering that question. So do your research. It'll really help. And also that can help you answer that when at the end of the interview, when the employer asks, do you have any questions? So let's say they didn't ask you, let's say they never asked you why you're interested. Let's say that question never comes up. Well, then you keep those things in the back pocket for when at the end of the interview, when the employer asked, do you have any questions? That's when you could ask, say, yeah, so I saw in the news recently about this really cool initiative where you all are helping, um, support the local women in coding program in the metro area. Can you tell me anything about that? What's how's that initiative going? Is there what's the company doing to support that initiative? Um, and is the team involved with that initiative in any way? So that again, that shows that you have done your research, that you're interested in what the company is doing, and that you understand the company's mission. So doing your research it doesn't have to just be the answer to this question. That doesn't have to be just that answer. It can you can use those things in your back pocket for to answer a lot of questions or lulls in the conversation should they happen. Um, Matt says, "Can how do you frame not training in a formal academic pay for it boot camp versus the 100 devs self-directed community experience?" So, um, again, don't snitch on yourself. Um, I would say, I kind of like how we answered this question right here, number 14. Um, Again, saying things like, I really enjoyed working with the 100 Devs agency, emphasizing the collaboration, the group projects, the paid projects, your client project or your open source contribution. Um, and again, pointing to those concrete examples on your resume and saying like, yeah, as a part of that agency, I completed projects X, Y, and Z. I did, 5 or 6 group projects. um, we we attended regular seminars where we really solidified our knowledge of these coding concepts. React, JavaScript, whatever. So again, focusing on the positives and not making that distinction between, what is 100 devs specifically. Focusing on the components of 100 devs, I think is a good way to go. Focusing on the strengths of 100 devs, how you refined your skills in 100 devs. Getting too caught up in the semantics of exactly what 100 devs is, I think can be a bit of a trap. CD has a great question. They say, if I may ask and you're comfortable answering, absolutely. Um, why are you learning full stack web dev when you're already a SQL software engineer? Are you looking into a field change or just enjoy learning new stuff? Yeah. So a little bit about my background, just in general, for those who don't know. So I don't have any type of a coding background. Sorry, any type of formal coding education. I do have a college degree, but it had nothing to do with software or coding or computers in general. I was a stats major, and we did everything by hand. We did everything on paper with calculators. It was all theory and concepts. And it really taught me zero computer skills. Um, and I took one coding class in college and I friggin' hated it. I didn't understand anything about it. The way it was taught it was not focused on any ways that we apply the code. It was all theory, and I don't like theory. And so it didn't vibe with me at all. I nearly failed it. The only thing that saved me was the group project because I was that annoying group member that like people have to drag across the finish line. I didn't understand it at all. Um, and I didn't really dip my toe into coding at all until I got my first job, which was with an American health insurance company, um, as an analyst. So just a cube jockey, collating spreadsheets, right? Just working with Excel, adding numbers together, building dashboards, that kind of thing. Super boring. But what it did teach me was how to link Excel dashboards to databases. And in order to do that, we essentially had to write very, very simple SQL queries. I didn't even know what it was called. I didn't know what the word SQL stood for. I just knew that was the option that I had to choose in the list of like connection options in Excel. Like choose the one that says SQL. Cool. What's that? Don't know, don't care. And then write a little tiny SQL query to just grab the data that I needed. But again, that was mostly copy and paste. But when you're a fresh college grad and you get a new skill, what do? You put it on your resume. And so I did that. And so after I got super bored at that current job, and I decided to look for a new job, I had SQL on my resume, and I applied for a position. I just wanted something different. And I applied for a position as an operations. It was an operations analyst on the job posting at an e-commerce company, the one that I've mentioned before. And one of the requirements was SQL. And so having SQL on my resume helped to get my foot in the door. And then I interviewed well, and I got the position. And I learned the rest and pretty much most of what I know about SQL from that job. Um, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that most of what I have learned about coding well, all of what I've learned about coding has been on the job focused. And so I have a great practical knowledge of coding, of SQL in general. So really just SQL. Like that's all I ever had to use on the job was just SQL, and doing database stuff. Um, and so I felt I had this sort of nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like I am missing huge chunks of knowledge in my brain about coding in general. Like I know SQL, and that is a very narrow language. Basically, what SQL does is it lets you talk to databases, and that's it. You can't build apps with it like alone. You can use it as part of an app, but you can't build an app on SQL. Um, and it is very like narrow and focused for what it does. And I thought, man, I just got this job as a senior developer. So this is after I'd gotten my senior dev job as a SQL dev. And I thought, I feel almost bad about having this senior title when all I know is SQL. And so that's when I saw, like, it was 2 months after I got that job that I saw Leon's Reddit post. And I thought, this could finally make me feel better about being a senior dev if I know other languages and a little bit about the concepts behind how code works and how this whole system fits together, like some big picture stuff. If I can learn some big picture stuff, I'll feel better about being a senior dev. Um, and so, yeah, that's long for a very long answer to a very short question. That's why I'm in 100 devs, even though I'm really not looking for another job. I just want to learn more. And that's a great I don't know, it's a great fire to keep burning, is that desire to just keep learning, to not stagnate, to never stop. um and that looks really good too in an interview, is that desire to constantly be learning and picking up new skills that may not be immediately valuable to the job at hand, that you can just learning for the sake of learning because I wanted to. I, I'm learning JavaScript because it's fun, and I can do cool stuff with it. And eventually, will I leverage that to get another job? Probably, yeah. It's something that I'll probably talk about and be like, yeah, I spent a year, or however long at some point we'll see. I spent a year, more than a year, over a year, just learning web development just for fun on the evenings and teaching it to others. And just because I wanted to, because I felt like it was something new to be passionate about. Um, so that could be a really valuable thing to talk about too. That thirst for learning. And Piece of Shoot says it's super fun to keep on learning it. That it certainly is. It invigorates the brain. And Ship That Code has a good uh, point there about doing research about employers. If you know the names of your interviewers in advance, you can do some research on them specifically too. And I have done that. Yep, I have definitely stalked people on LinkedIn. Um, Basically, looking at their profiles to see, do they have like outside passions that they list, that I could relate to or speak to, or do they have certain things listed that maybe tell me things I shouldn't talk about in an interview? Are there certain things that might make them dislike me just maybe unconsciously based on something that I've mentioned? So it can give you some things to steer away from too. So in a past interview, I saw that one of my interviewers had a certain uh, organization that they were involved with that told me told me a thing in my previous history that I should probably not talk about. Um, so that can help as well. Behavior questions. How would you apply these to a software team that is really agile and works with shadowing, task pair programming, small development tasks that contribute towards something bigger that's there's a really loud sound outside, sorry. Uh, something bigger that's not completed yet. Um, so when if you're if you're getting into this small team, you should probably emphasize anything in your past that where you've done a lot of collaboration and maybe worked in a very fast pace and environment with shifting priorities. Um, so emphasizing collaboration, emphasizing how well you work with groups, and how well you pick up new concepts, and also maybe if you can, um, emphasizing a time in your past when you've essentially done what this team is doing, when you have been a part of a large project and seen it through from inception to completion. Um, because they want to see, do you have past history with large projects? Have you contributed to previous large projects? And if you can't answer that, that's okay. But at the very least, emphasize how well you collaborate, how well you communicate, and how well you pick up new concepts. Do you know how to do recursive CTE queries in SQL? No. Nope. Uh, like I say, I do have, being, taught on the job, I really only know like what I need to know to get my work done at my previous several employers. And so, yeah, I have large chunks of knowledge, the theory style knowledge that I just don't know. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having knowledge gaps because, if I need to fill it, I'll fill it. Um, but it's also important to understand, to be aware of the things that you don't know. And that's partially what drove me to 100 devs, is being aware of how much I didn't know. Matt says, deja vu. I needed to get data into Excel and needed to learn SQL and API. Yeah, sometimes you just pick up new skills out of necessity, right? And that can start you down a whole path. Count the Shells brings up a great point. They say, yeah, I'm learning TypeScript on the job. Learning is always fun, and getting paid for it is even more so. Yes, 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 yes. So you don't got to know everything. And that kind of segues into something else I wanted to talk about. So thank you for triggering that in my brain. Um, so I've seen from some folks that they're concerned that they don't know literally everything like that's on the job requirement list. I've seen that from folks from like in folks in Leon's chat and on the Discord. They're like, but I don't know, you know, this one thing. I got to learn this thing before my interview. I got to learn all about this thing. I got to know how to use it. I got to be good at it before my interview. And that's not true. Um, Employers want to teach you. They want to teach you, especially they want to teach you how to do things their way, right? How things are done on their side of the house. And so if you can, again, I keep saying this, but I can't emphasize it enough. If you can show them how good you are at learning, that you know how to learn and pick things up, they're going to be willing to teach you. And they're going to pay you, obviously, because you're employed. They're going to pay you to learn that stuff. Sometimes an amazing employer might even pay you to take classes. There was one person in the Discord who was being paid to do 100 devs, or and people are paid to do other types of courses as well. They just want to teach you. They want to build that skill set so you can contribute back to them. Um, Adrian, welcome. What's the best way to learn a new language? Yeah, there's no real best way. It kind of depends on how you learn. Um, but for me, anyway, the best way to pick up this web development stuff has been in a sort of a group collaborative setting. And so in that case, for me, it's been 100 devs, um, because we collaborate together. It keeps us on track. For me, if I can procrastinate on learning something, even if I want to learn it, if I can procrastinate, I will. If I get the opportunity, I will procrastinate. And so the thing that I like about 100 devs is that there's that sense of group momentum where we're all moving forward. And so you don't want to, you don't want to fall behind, right? Um, and there's mechanisms that make it okay to fall behind, but you set a certain pace for yourself and you kind of want to stick to it. And so that's what's been good for me rather than purely self-directed learning. This group learning has been good. So to answer your question, the best way to learn a new language in my experience so far has been learning with a group. And then immediately, so learning the concepts for the language, and then immediately applying them. So not just learning the theory and then moving on, like learning what a string method is, and then moving on to the next thing. It's been okay. I know what this is now. How do I apply it and make it work for me and do something for me and produce a result? Because that's what's going to make it stick in your brain. And Drunk Uncle says, I learned a couple days ago military veterans and their spouses are diversity hires. Yeah. So when I was hired, I remember having to go through, or sorry, when I networked my way into my current job with the senior dev role, but I still had to fill out an application. Um, so on that application, I do remember seeing a question about whether um, I was a veteran or, married to a military person or something like that. And so, yeah, I do remember that being on the form. And Rayton says, yeah, I believe Leon mentioned if you meet 50 to 60% of the skills listed, then you're good. Yeah, absolutely. YOLO, right? And maybe it's something, and if it's something that's crucial on the list that you don't feel like you have any knowledge of, then spend the weekend beforehand researching what that thing is, whether it's Vue or Angular or Python, whatever. Spend the weekend before cramming on it, and then so at least you can speak to it when it comes up in the interview. Hurt says, yeah. So Daddy Yankee from the T spill on Friday, Daddy Yankee being a current developer, landed a Python role with no Python experience and is being paid to learn. Yeah, 100%. So in my case, so for my current senior dev role, um, at the time when I interviewed for that role, I did have previous experience in SQL, but I hadn't touched SQL for 3 years. I'd had a SQL role where I learned most of what I knew up to that point at that e-commerce company, and then I bailed on that, and I got another job where I was just a data analyst again. I was a spreadsheet jockey again. I was doing some software administration and stuff like that, and some technical support, but I wasn't doing any SQL, that's for sure. I didn't do SQL for 3 years until I interviewed for this senior SQL dev role. So I was rusty to say the least. And so, yeah, you don't got to be the top of your game. But again, what you got to show is that you can learn, that you can grow, that you can collaborate, and that you can work well with the team. And those things are more important than the specific skills you have at that point. Because your employer, again, is going to want to train you up in the way that they do things. And so sometimes it's better if maybe you aren't a super expert, because then they can shape you in the way that they want to. Real Scotty says, "I love procrastinating." Yeah, I'm sure I think a lot of us do, right? A lot of us are pretty good at procrastinating, and sometimes that can help you because you can work well under pressure. Um, but yeah, it can be hard to you know get things done when they need to be done. Oh, thank you for the hydrate. Yeah, I'm starting to get a little gravelly there in the voice, so thank you. Um, Blip says, I love learning and growing, yet seem to struggle with the doing, which is where mastery comes. Yeah. I mean, a way you could maybe frame that a little bit is to think about, okay, I learned this awesome new skill. And how can I turn this new skill into a tangible thing that I can put on my resume, a tangible project that I can put on my GitHub? Well, in order to do that, I have to apply this skill. So I should build an app to to add to my GitHub. And so if you can turn it into like an achievement, a tangible achievement, that could help. Again, I'm not you. I don't know, how your mind works, but that can sometimes help me. Is I think about it usually in terms of like stream topics. I could say like, oh man, I learned this, we just learned this cool, MVC structure or something like that. Now I need to find a way that I can talk about this on a stream. So I'm gonna have to build an app. Um, and that's what we did in the case of MVC specifically, is that we learned the structure, and then I was like, all right, I got to come up with an app to demonstrate this structure, and so we built a to do app. And so that helped me not procrastinate and fail to apply this new concept that we just learned, is having a tangible need for output. There is one code war tagged as SQL. Actually, there's a lot of code wars tagged as SQL. So if you know a little SQL and you want to practice, there's plenty of there's 8 Qs and 7 Qs that are so if don't look at the tags. If you actually switch your language, so switch the language from JavaScript to SQL, and then there's actually quite a few SQL code wars. I've done a few of them. They're not bad. Spaghetti says, "Do you ever have to build indexes for tables and stuff?" Absolutely, all the time. Um, so a lot of what I do is ETL operations, so extract, transform, load. Um, and a lot of what I do is taking data from a source system that our end users cannot access. So it comes from this source, it's generated there. We extract it, only take what we need, transform it. So that could be a bunch of different operations. And, you know, setting dates, adding fields, doing complex calculations based on the input data, all sorts of things. And then we load it into the target system in a form that the end users um, know how to access, and and it has all the fields that they want, it has all the field names that they want, all the calculations are done, it's theirs to query and or output inside of our visualization tools such as Tableau or Cognos. um, and so we essentially clean up the data and get it ready for user consumption. And at each point, we are building tables and we're indexing those tables from, because sometimes they're massive. Sometimes they are. So one of the tables that I finished recently has over 7 million rows, which is pretty small actually. Sometimes they can have in the tens of millions of rows. And so indexing can really help make those manageable. Um, and so yeah, I do a lot of indexing. Blip says, I think my ADHD makes it a struggle. I can spend a week on a project perfecting it to my liking and then not summon the effort to make a GitHub README and take screenshots for a portfolio for months. I know that feeling. Absolutely, I do. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD or anything, but I do have some of those traits on occasion. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be really hard summoning the energy to do that last step, even if it only take a couple minutes. I just think it's important to not beat yourself up about it, right? To not let it consume you and be something that stops you from doing other things as well, because you just feel so ashamed about not getting this other thing done. And just finding something to motivate you. Who knows what it could be? And you might not always be able to, but if you can find something that can help motivate you to take that final step, even if it's just adding one thing to your list of daily tasks, be like, oh yeah, and do this readme file, and then you just get it done. And then you do the part of actually pushing it to GitHub the next day. Breaking it apart into smaller tasks can sometimes help as well. Not all the time, again, I don't know your brain, but breaking it apart into even smaller tasks can sometimes be helpful. Matt asks if Informatica is in our stack at work as a SQL dev. Yes, actually, it is. Good eye. We do use Informatica. Yeah, Informatica Power Center for a lot of our ETL operations. I'm actually pretty excited. Um, I'm going to get the chance to learn yet another ETL tool at work called Skyvia, potentially for another project. That's not been finalized yet, but I was actually picked to learn this new tool. Out of everybody else on my team, they picked me. So I'm pretty excited. Get to learn a new tool, something else to put on my resume as a skill that I have, to learn a new tool for a special project. Oh, yeah, it is break time. Good eye. We will take a break. Matt Wheelahan says, hard. Yes, Informatica is hard. It is. Yes, also correct. It is complicated and difficult, but once there's certain you can learn the patterns, and just like with anything else, you learn the patterns and you get the hang of it. Just takes a while. Um, yeah, so let's go ahead and take a break. And Spaghetti, I will answer your question after the break, absolutely. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. I'm loving the conversation so far. It's been really great, and I want to keep having it. So, yeah, when we get back, we'll do more, talk about more career questions or any of these other Banky questions that you have, any questions you have about my career, or the stuff I do, or just in general working as a dev. Again, I'm happy to answer those questions. So, let's take 5 minutes, get up and stretch. I always sit down during the breaks because I'm standing right now. So I take 5 minutes and I sit down, and then we'll just do the opposite of whatever you're currently doing for 5 minutes, and get a glass of water or whatever. And I'll see you back here in 5. All right, let's reset and go. All right, see you back in 5. All right, folks, we got about a minute left in the break. So go ahead and fill up your water glass, or do your wrist exercises or whatever you need to do, and then come on back, and we will continue this excellent conversation we are having um, about interviews and working and anything else you want to talk about. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and stop the timer, and let's get back to talking about interviews and coding and dev work and whatever else we want to talk about. Okay, hello, we are back. Um, I am the briefcase says, welcome to the stream, briefcase. They say, hi, it's 3 a.m. here. I'm also very productive. Well, okay. Um, I hope you do get some sleep at some point. I'm happy you're being productive. And thanks for jumping into the stream. So before the break, Spaghetti Developer asked, do you do the ETL and PL SQL? So yes, we do use. So we use Oracle, um, and we use PL SQL. And I build all of my tables in PL SQL, and alter them and do various other manipulations of the tables themselves. Yes, that's done in PL SQL. As far as building the mappings and the workflows, that is done in Informatica, which builds those connections between the tables in order to facilitate the data flow and do those transformations. Yeah, so that part's done. The movement of data and the transformation of data is done in Informatica, and the tables themselves are built in PL SQL. PL SQL developer. Yeah. Oh, that's fine, Rayton. Um, I think that the overall sentiment is still correct, right? The fact that you don't need to meet all of the requirements of a job listing in order to network your way in, right? Yeah. Okay, so Tracy says the stream is running in the background while I add readmes to my GitHub projects. I procrastinated for a little bit too long. There you go. Glad I was able to give you a little nudge to get those on there. Well, if you look at my GitHub, I mean, I have a lot of projects on there, but I don't. They don't have readmes and they aren't fully formatted. So procrastination, again, that's something that it's easy to push projects, but it's hard to do that final step of making them presentable for an outside viewer. So yeah, I'm guilty. 100%. All right, what other so let me highlight this blue here because we'd covered it. Whoa. What other questions are we struggling with from a behavioral perspective, or what other questions would you like to ask me about my work or interviewing or whatever? That's a good point, Hertz. So Hertz says updating the README is a good way to get that green square because it counts as a commit. Aha, yes. Very good. Delicious green squares. So we've got a lot of the other behavioral questions here. Or if somebody has a past experience that they are not sure how to talk about in an interview, I'm happy to help you frame that as well so that you are able to confidently talk about it and tie it to the position that you're interviewing for. Sally says, maybe we connect with you on LinkedIn, or do you prefer Discord instead? So both is fine. You can connect to me on both places. Yeah, no worries. Zena says, how many projects displayed on GitHub is too much? I have 8, and I didn't know if that takes away from the meat and potatoes by keeping my old projects. So, Zena, I guess the question back to you then would be, do you feel comfortable that all of those projects are you do you feel comfortable talking about all of those projects and emphasizing um, the qualities of each of those projects in an interview, or are there any where you're like, well, that doesn't necessarily reflect something that I would like a potential employer to see. If all eight of them do, if you're like, yep, each of these demonstrates something that I would love to speak to in an interview, then yeah, leave all eight. um, but if any of them are, maybe not your best work, maybe you might want to get rid of those, or hide them. But if all eight are something you're like, yep, I can speak to the unique qualities um, of each of these that demonstrate a new skill that I learned for this project, and I want to emphasize that in an interview, then 100%. You said some is simple event listener stuff. Yeah. So those you might want to, not show front and center, and then really just the remaining, the ones that are remaining on the page should be ones where you're like, if it comes up in an interview and they say, oh, can you tell me what you did on this project, you can be like, yes, on that project is where I learned, how to do such and such in React, or where I learned a new way to structure my CRUD apps. So I don't know, to do this unique thing. So something that you feel proud of talking about in an interview. Yeah, no worries. All right, what else? What other questions are we struggling with, or um, the things we're not sure about? Oh, and another thing too, while y'all are thinking about that, so another thing too, I kind of wanted to talk about um, is I've seen also sort of some anxiety on the Discord and in general of um, people wondering how quickly they would have to start contributing. Like you get hired as a dev, and a dev writes code, right? And so people are wondering, okay, wait, am I going to have to like immediately start pumping out code and pushing things to production and pushing things to GitHub for my job? Like, how quickly do I have to pick things up? And I will say, so Leon has said this, and I have actually found this to be true in my personal experience, is that the first few months you're not going to be able to do much. um, you're going to be learning a lot. You're going to be, as they say, drinking from the fire hose, getting a lot thrown at you. You're going to be learning how to properly format your code in the way that the company expects. You're going to be reading documentation. You're going to be learning how systems fit together. And so those first few months, you're not going to be expected to produce very much. You might be given a few simple, one step little, gotcha, like single projects that your manager helps hold your hand and walk you through a little bit. But yeah, those first few months you're gonna feel like you're underwater the entire time, and that's okay. And that can depend on the employer too. So um, Spaghetti shares a different experience. In both small companies I worked for, I started on the second week. Um, it could be too that they start you out with a series of small projects and they tell you how to do those, right? They tell you this is what you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then turn that in. And then they slowly ramp you up in that way. But either way, it should be a slow, sort of a slow ramp up, a slow introduction to how things work. Because what they don't want is throwing somebody immediately into the fire and then having them churn out a bunch of work that's bad. We already talked about that when I talked about my failure, right? My biggest failure. That was me trying to go to do too much too quickly. And so your employer shouldn't want that. And that's, yeah, and that's a key word, should. I'm telling you how things should work. But that's, Leon has said that, and that's been my experience too. So that's the experience I'm going to sort of profess here. I'm not saying that's going to be true in 100% of all cases, and that's not true. You know, nothing is, right. Nothing's true 100% of the time, but that's been what Leon has said, and that's been my experience as well. And small companies don't understand this concept. Yeah. But at the very least, hopefully, they maybe pair you with another developer. They maybe pair you with another developer who you can um, ask questions of. And that's so in when I was hired for my current role, I was, I was given some things to do, some small projects to take on. But I was also paired with someone who had been on the team for a while and basically said, "Yep, anytime you have questions, ask this person." And that was true. That person would drop everything and just be like, "Yep, let's get on a call, and I will help you figure this out. I will tell you how we do things here, explain these concepts to you, tell you where to find the data, and we'll walk through it together." Yeah, and that's another thing. So I love that you brought that up, piece of shoot. So that's another thing that you can ask in the interview. Um, so you could say something like, "So what is the, what do you expect to see from a new developer on this team in the first, 3 months or 6 months or a year?" You can kind of get a feel for how they expect that growth to progress over time. Um, Yeah, exactly. What Piece of Shoot said. What does the first 90 days of this new dev, look like? And so I asked that question in my interview for my current role, and they basically said, um, you know, reading documentation, training, and doing a few small uh, project releases, that kind of thing. And I was like, sounds good to me. I'm all up on, if you're going to train me and kind of help me through my first few releases, I'm game for that. I'm totally up to pick that up. And so yeah, that's a very valid question to ask, and I'm glad Piece of Shoot brought it up because that's a question I definitely would ask. From just you're not trying to imply anything or anything like that. You're just asking the honest question: how quickly am I being asked to ramp up? What can I do to make sure that I'm staying on that timeline? That kind of thing. Yeah. And another great question. How is success measured in this company? Have them give you specifics and get them in writing. Yeah. Another great, that's another great way you can get a feel for the culture too, right? How do they reward high performers? Um, how do they measure success? Yeah. How do they measure functions? Do they have metrics? Do they measure based on projects completed? What is their measurement? How do they measure success? Yeah. I like that, it's always great if they can say, yeah, we have a performance appraisal process. Okay, how often does that happen? Is it yearly, or are there more of quarterly updates? Or if it is yearly, do they give you updates, like informal updates, more often? They might say, um, you know uh, we do a yearly appraisal process, but bi-weekly, we have one-on-ones with your manager, so you'll hear any issues that might come up. You'll hear those in your one-on-one, and then so nothing should be a surprise in your yearly review. Hey, Hakti, welcome to the stream. So, why do I have so many viewers? Well, that's a very complex question. Um, so, I'm learning web development, and I also teach web development concepts. And so, normally I do sort of JavaScript projects. We do full stack apps, we do CRUD apps. Um, we do React. We do a little, we've done a SQL stream before, so we do a lot of coding education. But today we're focusing on job interviews. Um, so how can you ace a job interview? What are some of the common questions that can come up in a job interview? So we've been talking a lot about learning to code, but the other half of that is actually getting a job doing coding. And so that's what we're talking about today. So feel free to stick around if you're so inclined. Floco says, "Dang, it feels bad. I went through the cruddiest interview of my life last week. Um, Guy doesn't even speak, asked me the wrong type of question, unrelated to front end, kept losing internet connection." Yeah, and that's something that can happen from time to time, right? Uh, Sometimes you're just going to have a bad interview. And so it sounds like you might have lucked out there a little bit. If that person didn't care enough to even ask you the right types of questions, that's probably not someone you want to even work for. So it might be a good thing that things didn't go well, because then you might have, dodged a bullet there. Yeah. And so that's not on you in any way. That's not a bad thing. That shouldn't, don't feel like that reflects on you in any way. That's entirely on them. So you can be like, yep, that one didn't go well. I'll get the next one. That's a good mentality to have, Floco. You're like, I didn't even try to ask questions at the end. I was like, man, I'm out. Rayton says, do you use Jira at your company? That's a great question. So, what is Jira? Jira is a tool. It's a branded tool, but it works on the general concept of Kanban. And so, Kanban is a Japanese concept where its projects are broken out into components, and those components are listed on a board. Like sometimes it can be a literal physical board with cards on it. And those cards move across the board as they're completed. And so that way you can take a quick glance at the board and see the status of what everyone is working on all at once and how well the project is progressing. And so as far as Jira specifically, I have used Jira before, not at my current employer. However, we do use the Kanban concept. We use a different tool, but we use the Kanban concept at my current employer for the current mate. We're currently working on a 4-year project, which is a massive data, uh, changing data warehouses. So where all of our data is stored, we're changing it, which is a massive undertaking. Um, and so we use Kanban to keep organized. On a team of multiple developers using Kanban, those Jira concepts, so not Jira specifically, but those concepts have been massively helpful in just figuring out where everything is and how well it's progressing. So, yes. Do they still ask these cheesy questions for senior dev interviews? The behavioral questions? Yeah, absolutely. They want to see how well. It doesn't matter how much you know, like technically, how well. If you can't work well with a team, if you're going to be that a hole that is standoffish and crappy to other people on the team, then it doesn't matter how much you know. You got to be able to work with people. So yeah, they definitely still asked me for my senior dev interview. It was mostly these questions. This was the majority of what they asked me about. They wanted to see how well I collaborated with people, how well I worked on a team, how well I picked up new concepts, and that I didn't feel like that I didn't just want to sit and stagnate at the senior level. That's not what they want. Thank you, Hockey. I appreciate the yeah. I'm glad I have a good vibe. That's what I'm going for. Hockey, sorry. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm glad I have a good vibe. Oh, you love coding too? You love JavaScript and web apps? That's rad. Nice. I love the overall coding community on Twitch. It's not something I had been aware of until I started streaming, but there's a really great coding community overall on Twitch. It's not the biggest community, but sometimes that's nice, right? Because um, chat is more personal that way. It's not just flying by, and I can then the coding streamers can spend time talking to people and answering questions. So that's one of my favorite things about it. Well, spaghetti, if these questions make you uncomfortable, it's that's fine. You can narrow your pool of the types of companies that you want to work for. That's totally your prerogative, right? You can choose to work for only small companies, but I like the concept of you choose which doors you want to open for yourself, right? So the more types of questions you're comfortable answering, the more doors you open for yourself, the more opportunities you have access to. Now, whether you want to have access to those opportunities is completely up to you. There's no right or wrong answer. Um, you can close those doors, but again, it's just fewer opportunities. So, or you could spend a little time and get comfortable answering these questions, even if you don't like them. You only have to answer them once, right? The interview, you answer them once, you're done. Um, and if you just spend a little time, you might end up making yourself available for additional opportunities that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So again, I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't do something. That's up to you what opportunities you want to have access to. Let's see, what is the Oh, Jira. So Piece of Shoot says the Piece of Shoot doesn't like Jira. And Floco mentions that it has its flaws. Yeah, so a lot of the thing about Jira is in the implementation. It's one of those pieces of software that's so large that you have to configure it for your company's specific needs. And so it can live or die by the way that your company configures it. So I've been lucky that when I've previously used it, it was configured well and it did everything that we wanted and nothing that we didn't. And so it worked extremely well. It was fluid, it was collaborative. I friggin' loved it. But if you've had a bad implementation of it, then yeah, I could see how it could become very annoying. Oh, we got a stretch. All right. Oh, I'm really sore today. Yesterday, I did a bunch of yard work, like, kind of cutting things down for the winter, dead plants and stuff, clearing things out. And I also, this probably was a mistake. I saw that my neighbor's roof was all covered in leaves and branches from their oak tree, and they're older, so they couldn't, really do anything about it themselves. So I took a ladder and I, I lugged my leaf blower up there, and I was like blowing off their roof, which used a lot of muscles that I'm not used to using. Probably why I'm sore today. Yeah, Kanban as a concept is great, and yeah, the implementation can be bad. Yep. Tio Code says yoga. Yeah, I should get into yoga. Yeah. I'm not very flexible, and I think yoga would probably help with that. I have something at the gut level that just won't allow me to answer questions like that. Yeah, sometimes it's really hard to talk about personal things. Um, it can be extremely difficult to talk about ourselves, to talk about our accomplishments. And I'm not saying that this is your problem, Spaghetti. I'm just saying in general. It can be very hard to talk about ourselves and our accomplishments in a positive way. Sometimes that can feel kind of wrong or weird, or, why I don't want to talk about myself. Why, like, don't make me talk about myself. Um, and yeah, I used to feel that way. I was like, nope, don't want to talk about myself. This feels icky. It feels wrong to toot my own horn, as you say. Um, I improved on that greatly by just practicing and answering those questions. And even though it sucked, just slogging through it until I had sort of answers that I could just pull out of my brain at the top of the hat without without ruminating on them too much or thinking about them too hard. So I didn't have to talk myself out of them. I just had them in my head and I could just blam out, you know? Um, so again, practice can help you get over that hump. Um, if you struggle talking about yourself in a positive way. I do flex. I do flexbox. I don't do flexible. That's kind of how I am. Yeah, it's hard to sell myself. I freeze up and become inarticulate. Yeah, and you're not the only one. Um, Piece of Shoe says, as a 40-year-old, do yoga like now. Okay, as a 32-year-old, I'll try to take your advice. I think there's some yoga classes at the local co-rec. I could probably join. I've been thinking about it for a while. So Spaghetti says, but what if they ask a question you never practiced? Yeah, that's that's a great um, counter question, I guess. Yeah, what if they I've practiced all these things, but what if they ask me something I haven't practiced? The good thing is that if you've practiced a variety of questions and and learned to think about yourself in that way, where you kind of have an intuitive knowledge of your past accomplishments, your past projects, how to answer the questions that you do know. A lot of the times, if you get asked a curveball question, it'll at least have a connection to one of the questions that you have practiced. So the wording may not be the same, but I mean, there's a limit to the amount of things that they can ask about, right? If they're trying to get a sense of your behavior, there's a limit to the amount of things that they're going to ask you about. It's going to be about your general personality, how you handle tough situations, how you collaborate, how you work with teams, how you learn things. Those are kind of the general concepts they're going to ask about. And so what you can do is you can be like, well, like mentally you can think about like, okay, haven't practiced this question specifically, but that's similar to this other question that I did practice. And so I can take the basic gist of that answer, the basic things that I would say, and kind of just reconfigure them to fit the needs of this specific question. So I guess the short answer is once you've practiced a set of questions enough, you can take those concepts and reapply them and remix them a little bit to fit a similar question that you may not have practiced. So you just get a feel. You start to learn in general how to answer these types of questions. So getting out of that specific rote memorization and into some more improvisation, because you start to know yourself, and you start to know yourself and your accomplishments even better. And that's not immediate. That again, like with anything, it takes practice. It's not something you're going to be comfortable with right away off the bat. You won't. You just won't. I wasn't. I friggin' hated talking about myself and like answering questions about myself because it didn't feel good. Um, and it's just something you, again, you have to practice. You have to get that comfort level. The thought of recording myself and listening back sounds pretty terrible. Yeah, it is, but it's more about fear of a lot of that fear, at least in my case, came from uncertainty and came from the unknown. Right? I don't know how I sound. What if I don't sound good? Um, what if what if I don't say the right things? Well, the only way you're going to know that is by answering the questions, seeing how they sound, identifying, I could have answered that better, or, oh, I just thought of a better answer for that, and then practicing that answer. And eventually you'll come up with answers that you're happy with. And Piece of Shoot says, yeah, you can practice with a friend, and there's a Banki voice channel in the 100 Devs Discord. Yeah. Now, at the very start, I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that. I wouldn't have been willing or able to practice with somebody else. However, once you have your answers and you're like, okay, I feel okay with these. Like these are answers I could move forward with. Then I probably would have started practicing with another person. Um, a lot of what I did when I was practicing was I would go to a mirror and I would watch myself. I would literally speak to myself in the mirror and say like, do I look reasonably okay answering these questions? Not like not like I'm reading off of a script, or that I don't know what I'm talking about. Tell him to stop disrespecting you and ask something from the list. No, don't do that. The goal is to be comfortable enough with your answers that you can remix them on the fly and accommodate those altered questions. And some recruiters will tell you. They'll tell you, you should be able to talk about your projects. You should be able to talk about, X, Y, and Z beforehand. Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe a politer way to go about that could be like, well, if you don't know the answer to a question, like legit, if you are stumped and you don't know the answer, so okay, here's an example. So from my interview for the senior dev role, they asked me if I had any experience with ETL. So that thing that I do all the time, extract, transform, load. At that time, I did not. I had obviously built SQL tables and done SQL queries, but I didn't have any ETL experience, like moving data from place to place. I just didn't have that experience. Um, and I so I answered honestly, and I said, no, actually, the question was something like, do you have any experience with ETL? And can you tell us about that experience? And or a time when you've worked with others on an ETL project? And I said, nope. I was like, no, I don't. I actually don't have any experience with ETL. And but I've done a lot of collaborative data related projects, and I sort of segued that into you know here's a here's how I collaborated with others on a data related project, even though it wasn't ETL. So I kind of curved the question myself there a little bit, and talked about one of my other accomplishments instead. It was still tangentially related. And Matt says, yeah, and Matt says, get a bunch of interviews for stuff you're not into. Just break the ice, get used to it. Yeah, and that's the same advice that Leon gives. Is that when you're interviewing, start out with the companies you don't care as much about. So it's okay if you totally bomb. They're like your warm ups, right? They're like your warm up starter interviews. You can see what you're good at, see where you need, additional work, um, some questions you might not have been as prepared for as you thought, that kind of thing. You can kind of have some softball interviews, some warm up interviews that can help you get prepared for the companies you really want to focus later on. Yeah. Some great knowledge drops here in chat. I appreciate that from folks. And yeah, kind of reminding me about some of the stuff that Leon has said in the past that sort of echoes what we're talking about. Absolutely, got that active recall and spaced repetition happening. Yeah, that's why we that's why we like chat. It was all on purpose. I orchestrated this to make you all remember all that stuff that I didn't mention. It's all pre-planned. All right. Well, I think I'm probably going to wrap it up here around a little after 6. Uh, but let's we still got 15 minutes left or so. So let's keep going. Any other what else? What other questions? What other things do we want to talk about? Concerns, questions, uncertainties, behavioral questions here in the bank that you don't know how to answer. Um, Questions about working in tech. Whatever you want to talk about in the last few minutes here. I don't think I've touched the keyboard at all. In the past 3 hours, I don't think I've put any hands on the keyboard. Other folks out there, you gotta have some questions. I know you do. You're debating on whether no, do I put that? Should I put that in chat? Am I gonna sound am I gonna sound like a dork for putting that in chat? No, you won't sound like a dork. All questions are good questions. Just feel free to ask. Hey, no worries, Matt. Thanks for stopping in. Blip says, "Do you have any advice for getting to sleep on time?" That's actually something I've been working on lately because yeah, that's a problem. You all if you've all tuned in to any of my past streams, some of them are going into the late night hours a little bit. Um, and so yeah, you can do melatonin. Melatonin doesn't really do too much for me, just personally. I know it works really well for some folks. Um, it doesn't really do too much for me. And what I've actually found really helps is accountability. So I wear this Fitbit and it has a sleep tracking feature. And so I just wear it all the time. And as soon as I go to bed, it starts tracking my sleep. And then I can see on the app the next day, like, okay, I know when I think I went to bed, but when did I actually was I up on my phone for the next 30 to 40 minutes? Was I don't know, just browsing Reddit for an hour after I actually got in bed? True story. So when did I actually go to bed? And this tells me, this keeps track of that. And then it also says, all right, how good was that quality of sleep, and then when did I wake up? And so having this, wearing this, has actually really helped. It's just because then I can look at the last week and be like, oh gosh, why did I not, I didn't go to bed until midnight like 3 days in a row. That's not good. Because a lot of times I don't even remember, like that's just not something I remember. When did I go to bed? I don't know, because it's the next day, and then that was yesterday me. So having accountability really helps in my case. Hey, Giant, welcome to the stream. Any questions that should raise red flags that we need to be aware of? So that's a good question. So I think you're talking about questions like coming from the interviewer, um, and I would say any questions that ask about your willingness to like work after hours. Are you willing to put in extra hours at crunch time? Are you willing to work weekends? Are you willing to work nights? And you might want to say yes just because you want to seem like a team player, but that's a slippery slope, especially if for a position where you're not getting overtime. Um, you know, they shouldn't be asking you to work outside that 8 to 5. Like, that's your time. That's your time. That's your family time. Um, and so, you know, are you willing to be a team player and do extra work for us? No, I am not. I will be signing off at 5 p.m. Thank you very much. um, you know, it's oh, are you willing to have these flexible hours? You know, and I made that mistake when I worked for that e-commerce company. I think there was some question in the interview like, are you willing to be flexible with your schedule, like during holidays, and you know, put in the work that needs to be done? And me being naive, I was like, yeah, I can be a team player. One job, please. And I got the job, but it ended up not being a good result. Like for me personally, mentally, no. So yeah, that would be an example of a red flag question because I experienced it. Passion Over Paper says, do you have any advice on tying the law or a legal job with tech? Yeah, okay. So thinking about law and legality, well, in the law, there's a lot of small details, right? I was listening to the Legal Eagle YouTube channel recently, and they were talking about how there was a law that, you know, um, all these laws that were the meaning changed based on a single comma, right? Based on the Oxford comma and the importance of that in laws that can completely change the meaning and the implementation. And so I think what that shows, being in law and legal, it shows that you are attentive to detail, and that you are, you know, you're able to keep a lot of these, you know, small details, these minutia in your head, and that you are able to learn and absorb their significance. So not just what's written on the paper, but what does that mean? And so you could say, like, you know, my background in law has given me a tremendous attention to detail, you know, a tremendous sense of organization, and the ability to not only just memorize the words but understand the larger meaning from for how all of these individual components fit together into a whole. And so that could be a way that you could interpret it. 10 milligram. I have to look at what the pills are, the melatonin pills that I have in my cabinet are. So far, I mean, just trying to set myself to more of a routine has really worked rather than just going to bed whenever I feel like it, which I don't usually feel like it until like 1 or 2 a.m. So forcing myself to go to bed at 10 actually makes me start feeling tired at 10. What's my score average for my sleep score? On my Fitbit, low 80s, maybe. Now that's come up. That's gotten better. It used to be 70s. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to get it better. I want to get up to 90. I don't know if I'll get there. It's been hard, but I'm working on it. Um, how can one convince a company that time zone difference is not much of an issue when applying for the job? So, in order to do that, what they're probably looking for, what they're probably worried about, is that whether you're someone who can work independently most of the time. If there's a large time zone difference, then I mean, you're going to be unsupervised for multiple hours in a day, probably, because your manager isn't going to be off work. And so, what they want to see is someone who can, you know, work independently, who has a proven track record of delivering work independently, on time and without much supervision. So, if you can demonstrate that, that would probably help. I'm not saying it's going to work, um, but that would probably help. And also, you know, that you can, I mean, there may be times when you would have to attend meetings that are outside of your regular work schedule. And so that may be something that you mentioned, be like, yes, I'm willing to, you know, if there are crucial meetings that I need to attend that are, you know, either before or after my regular work schedule, I am willing to do that, as long as, you know, as long as those meetings are truly business critical. So those are probably the two things that they're concerned about is delivering independent work on time without much supervision and, you know, potentially meetings, just from what I've seen from interviews that I've been adjacent to. And Piece of Shoot and Spaghetti offer some additional red flag questions. Or statements. We play hard here is also a no no. We're a family and we play hard. Work hard, play hard are no statements. And are you okay with highly stressful environments and tight deadlines, and also constantly shifting priorities? That's another one. So that just shows that they have no ability to properly delegate, prioritize projects, and that the work environment is chaotic. And so, yeah, those are great examples as well. Is that different from being on call? I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. Um, Sorry, I'm catching up with chat now, so I'm a little behind on the conversation. Been lurking for a while. Awesome. No, that's great. I don't mind lurkers at all. Thanks for watching. Thank you for the question. I'm torn between saying no to a company that mentions that type of overtime, and just getting hired so I can have experience. Yeah, in the end, that's your decision to make, right? There may be other factors of the company that outweigh the overtime thing. I can only share my experience with that type of strenuous, sort of unpaid overtime. For me, it was extremely detrimental. I learned a lot. There's no denying that. I learned some great skills that are still carrying with me today, but on balance, weighing the skills versus the effect it had on me, um, unfortunately, the negative effect that kind of work had on me overall, and it prevented me from doing a lot of things in my life, such as spending time with my family, spending time with my relatives, going on trips. Um, it just didn't. It wasn't worth it in the end. So again, that's your decision to make. I can only share my experience. Tio asks, how important was networking at the various stages of your career so far? How do you personally go about finding people to reach out to and have coffee chats with? Um, so, yeah, networking actually basically got me my current job as a senior dev. Um, as I mentioned previously on the stream, I was working as a data analyst, um, and I was doing. Oh, sorry, my phone has just decided to start playing all of a sudden. It does that occasionally. It'll just play a YouTube video just randomly. No, I didn't do anything. But so anyway, the so I was talking about, so I was working as a data analyst, but I was really mostly doing my work in Excel, and doing some data pulls with like Cognos and stuff like that. So no coding. And at that point in my at that position, I hadn't used SQL at all for 3 years. Um, Literally hadn't touched SQL for 3 years. And I'd done some Excel, I'd done a little VBA, building some macros, and done some like technical support for various software tools. But again, no coding. And then there's this manager I really admired, and he was the leader of a dev team in another department, and posted this position of a senior SQL developer. And I was like, haha, I would love to work for this guy, but I do not meet, like, I'm looking at the job description. I was like, I don't meet these criteria. Like, on paper, I am not a good fit. Um, but one of my coworkers was like, just apply for it. I mean, what do you gotta lose, right? Like, you like the manager, like, just, I don't know, apply for it. And I'm like, really? Okay, fine. And so what I did, this was before 100 devs. I just happened to do the right thing. I actually reached out to the manager. I said, "Hey, manager, hello. I'm in other department. I'd really love if you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes of your time. I'd love to talk to you about this role that you posted, the senior dev role that you posted, um, and learn a little bit more about it and learn a little bit more about your team." And so I networked with the manager, and we just happened to kind of establish a good rapport. Um, and he was able to learn a little bit about me, my ability to learn and pick things up quickly and absorb new concepts. Those were really crucial. And at the end, he was basically like, yeah, okay, go ahead and apply, put your application in. And so I'm like, cool. And so I applied, and as I said before, the interview ended up being mostly behavioral. It was multiple rounds. It wasn't just a quick cut and dry thing. It was 3 or 4 rounds of interviews with various groups. All of them trying to figure out whether I would be a good fit with their culture, with their team, with their position. Not necessarily like how much SQL do I know, but more about, am I going to be able to pick this stuff up and work well with the team? And in the end, the answer was yes, and I got the job. And I ended up being, I still am, the youngest person on the team, like the youngest person on the team age wise, by about a decade, and the least dev experience with dev work specifically. And so I think a lot of what helped me land that role was doing the proper networking. Because if I had just put in my application blind and just it had just gone into the stack, I think I would have been out in the first round. I think they would have cut me, just because on paper I did not meet the criteria. But networking helped me get that foot in the door, and it helped me bypass that first step of just looking at just doing comparisons on paper. And so, yeah, networking has been crucial in my career so far. Um, yeah, absolutely. Um, Chris says, your previous e-commerce seemed like a pretty stressful environment. How would you deal and diffuse those high stressful situations when you felt you were being pressed a tad much? Humor. Humor. And I've heard that from a lot of people who work in high stress jobs. Um, you know, EMTs, restaurant workers, that kind of thing. And I'm not comparing my stress level with like that of an EMT, no comparison at all. But just that in general, high stress tends to be best handled via humor. And so if you have a good sense of humor, you can tend to at least function well in those types of environments. I know that's what we did. At that e-commerce company, we would play jokes on each other. We would, throw pillows at each other or whatever. We would, I don't know, joke around all the time, joke about movies, argue about movies, and inconsequential stuff, just because it made it easier to get through those long days. Oh, as far as being on call, working outside of normal hours. And so, yeah, I mean, if on call is brought up as something that happens, you might you might dig a little bit gently into the specifics of that. Be like, okay, so how often are people on call? Um, you know, are calls frequent? Is there backup for on call? That type of thing. And so, depending on your level of concern and your overall vibe of the culture, you could see about the nature of on call. So in my case, being on call doesn't equate to overtime, like in my head at all. In my current role, like I don't mind being on call, because I know if something big happens, I can substitute that time later in the week. I can basically say, all right, I you know I spent an hour handling this thing, last evening, so I'm just going to take off an hour early on Friday. And everybody's like, yep, that's fine. Take off early. You're all good. Um, so to me, it balances out. But again, you can kind of judge your level of comfort with that depending on the overall cultural vibe that you're getting from those other questions that we talked about. It depends on your situation. As far as like looking at long hours and that type of thing. Um, you can accept an offer and then keep looking. Yeah, I mean, you could do it. You could plan on being in it in the short term and getting out right away, and using it as kind of a springboard. That's up to you. However you want to handle your career, and setting boundaries can help too. Sometimes, as in my that e-commerce company's case, there were no boundaries to set. It was something you could not do. But in some cases, yeah, you can basically say like, "Yep, I'm out at X hour and I won't be reachable until tomorrow." Um, that can be an option as well. Yeah, and I like the way that Piece of Shoot described on call. So being on call is when you need to be available if something happens. So something breaks, an overnight process stops working, um, a system goes down, a server crashes, something like that. Um, Working outside your hours is actively working. The first one is part of some jobs. So the later, so working outside of business hours, that's management failure. Yeah, I agree. That means that things aren't being managed effectively, that timelines aren't being set effectively, and that work isn't being delegated appropriately. Yeah. Your Poppy says, last week I got a job offer and negotiated to their capped amount for my salary, but it was at a casino, so I had to pass a federal background check and I failed it due to charges that were dismissed 7 years ago. Oh, that sucks. Um, Still pretty sad about it, but sticking with 100 devs and gearing up for wave two. Yeah, good job. I'm glad you are. Yeah, that's not, that shouldn't be a reflection on you at all. You know, oh, Justin, thank you so much for the resub, Justin. Other grats. Yeah. And like Leon said, you're going to go through 60 interviews, and in the end, only one of them needs to make it to the finish line, right? Make it past that finish line. And so, yeah, you shouldn't see that as a reflection on you at all. It just as another, another knot in the rope as you're climbing upwards. Yeah. Ian says, he says staffing was short. Yeah, so that's a management failure. Staffing was short at my company this summer, so they had me on call 4 hours every day. Ugh. In addition to an 8-hour workday. That's one reason why I'm leaving. I'm in IT. Yeah, that like piece of shoot said. I like the way that they described that. That's a management failure, staffing problems. That's something's not going right there. So I'm glad you're leaving. Again, thank you for this. Just another grats. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and the yeah, if you were upfront about that charge that was dismissed 7 years ago, and they're like, oh, it's fine, and then do the background check, yeah, that's garbage. Thanks, Brandon. A little off topic, but okay. If you have any questions about job interviews, you're welcome to ask. All right, I think we're gonna wrap things up here. Um, but I'm happy to answer any last questions that anybody has. But I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had today, and I felt like we covered so much. It's great. Um, and I feel like folks are really. I love that all the knowledge that folks in chat were able to share, which shows that we got a lot of knowledgeable folks out there. I hope that you're sharing this knowledge with others outside of this stream on the Discord, and folks are asking great, insightful questions. Folks are having good experiences and really sharing some good information. So that kind of knowledge transfer is everything we could hope for. Oh, thank you, Rayton. Thank you, Mike Z. Yeah, at this point, I think we gotta be honest about our past experiences, the good and the bad, because a lot of this stuff just doesn't get talked about enough. What is the process like? It's also mysterious, and it doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be. Interviews shouldn't be this mysterious black box that we all enter into unprepared and maybe leave with a job. It should be something that we can prepare ourselves for, that we can execute effectively, and leverage our way into jobs. No worries, I Perez. No worries, Chris. Thanks, Connie. Yeah, absolutely, piece of shoot. Good. I'm glad, Unicorn. Yeah, I hope we can keep doing this throughout the hunt. So during the hunt, my goal is to kind of keep having chill streams, not really covering anything new or groundbreaking. I mean, obviously, still doing homework. If as Leon assigns specific homework, well, if it's applicable, we'll cover it here on stream. But during the month of October, I kind of like to be chilly, chill, chill, and help you in the job hunt as much as I can, without introducing too much, crazy new concepts or stressful things during this already stressful time. So that's the goal anyway. We'll see. We'll see if I can execute. Awesome. Okay, let's. Again, I'm happy to answer any last questions, but in the meantime, I'm going to be looking for someone for us to raid, spread the love a little bit. So let me get that pulled up. As always, if you have suggestions for someone you'd like me to raid, I'm happy to hear that. Otherwise, we'll pick somebody on the list. All right, who do we have today? Raid. All right, we've got Team Vash. They do game dev. Techie Girl, also game dev. Ending with Allie or Dion Saga. Any particular affinity for any one of these guys, or anybody new that you'd like me to try out? Preferably somebody in the software slash game dev ecosystem, but it doesn't have to be. So yeah, we've got Team Vash, Techie Girl, Ending with Allie, or Dion Saga. Any of them are fine with me. Someone we haven't in a while. Yeah. Who haven't we rated in a while? I think Team Vash is probably the most recent of these. About Ending with Allie? I wonder what they're doing. Dion Saga. Yeah, we can see what Dion's doing. Oh, they look like they are doing. Are they doing game dev? They look like they are. Yeah, they look like they're doing game dev. Let's do them. All right. We'll raid Dion, see what they're up to. Um, and then I will see you all again next Wednesday for another stream. And so I look forward to it. But yeah, thanks for the conversation today. Really enjoyed it. And I will see you all again in a few days. All right. Starting the raid now. And then I'll kick y'all over there as soon as we're ready to go. I will say hi to Aria and the other kittens. Absolutely. All right. See you all later. Bye bye.